Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody to the April 1st meeting of Common Council and the first ever virtual meeting of Common Council. I want to thank the council and the public for all their patience as we adjust just about everything we do here in the city of Ithaca in response to the COVID-19 crisis. I want to begin the meeting, if I could, before we begin with agenda review. I want to just a brief update about the public health crisis that we're facing. So, as everybody knows, the coronavirus is spreading throughout the world, spreading throughout the country and New York State. So the Tompkins County Health Department is the lead agency on the response, and they've done a great job working primarily with the hospital, but also working with the state and all of us to do what we can to flatten the curve by reducing the spread and buying them more time to both staff up, create enough ICU beds, and get the medical equipment that they need. Our efforts at social isolation seem to be working. The spread has definitely slowed over the last 5 days, about 4 or 5 days. They just reported today that we are now at 80 confirmed positive cases, as well as one person in the hospital. So at most, we've only ever had 2 people in the hospital. One of those people has been discharged, so we're down to 2 now. We're going to try to have as normal a council meeting as possible. We did receive quite a lot of public comment. I don't know if it's fair for me to summarize that public comment. Maybe it's enough to tell the public that we received everything you wrote and all the phone calls you've made over the last week. The vast majority of public comment has been around the idea of a rent freeze, a resolution weighing in on that, not enacting a local rent freeze, but weighing in on our it's Seth Murtaugh's written the resolution, so I'll let him speak to it when we get there. But I could say that the broad feeling of the council is that while we think a local rent freeze is unworkable, likely because it's illegal, definitely because it's infeasible, we heard from hundreds and hundreds of people who are really freaked out and worried. People who've lost their job and lost their income and are worried about their friends and family who lost their job and lost their income. We also did, or I'll speak for myself, I also heard from quite a few landlords, probably a couple hundred landlords, who are similarly freaked out and are saying that they have expenses too, they've got mortgages and taxes and utilities, and that a simple freeze that doesn't reimburse them is going to lead to calamity as well. Foreclosures, loss of property, lower tax revenue, which could have a spiraling effect. So that was the bulk of the public comment. Just today, we did get a bunch of public comments, mostly from people who work downtown. So we heard from a few business owners, people working nonprofits downtown, the hotels, urging us to continue on with the conference center. We did get one letter to the opposite effect from a landlord downtown saying that a conference center should put the pause on. Did I miss anything in summarizing the public comment we received? Anybody? That was the bulk of it, right? It was the rent freeze and conference center. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, then any changes to the agenda, additions to or deletions from? I had that one proposed addition, which would be adding the planning board member. That came in very late, just today. So I'd understand if folks want to push until next month, but it was a promising application to replace outgoing member of the planning board, Matthew Johnston. Okay, well, we can cross that bridge when we come to appointments. No proclamations or awards this month. No, sorry, Duxon, did you have your?
We did talk about moving up Seth's resolution. Was everybody okay with that?
Yeah. Yeah, what if we move it to 4.2? So what if we do it just after? We could knock out the consent agenda items. We can hear from Steve. I think it'll be important to hear from Steve as soon as possible, but then that's 4.2 if we do Seth's resolution on the rent freeze. Is that okay?
Sounds great.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Hey, Savante, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I was having a little trouble with the audio earlier.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear everyone.
Well, that's more important. Honestly. Did you? No, I'm kidding. Okay. Great. So any special presentations? I see that we do have Anna Kels with us. Anna, would you like to give a report from the county legislature?
Yeah, hey guys. This is the first time I've actually been outside in 2 days, so I took the opportunity to do this and walk the dog at the same time. So I apologize, multitasking. But yeah, I mean, you guys obviously are keeping track of everything that we're doing via the Tompkins County Health Department. Hopefully, you guys can hear this. Of course, the wind picked up just now. In our last meeting, we did pass our resolution for the conference center. We've gotten a lot of emails. Most of them actually were in support of it. I think ultimately our vote was 10-4. And this was after the shutdown that we've had. The county actually shut down things before the state did. The vote happened after that, so it was definitely in a stressful situation. But ultimately, everybody decided, or majority of people decided, that given that the construction would happen in 3 years, and the great concern that we have right now is having a robust plan for economic recovery. And the reliance on just a few sources of economic recovery, that this provides an additional diversity to that. But there was also deep recognition of the situation we're in right now. But I think ultimately the fact that the development wouldn't happen for a couple of years, people felt comfortable supporting it in the context of economic recovery, particularly in support of the downtown hotels, tourism, restaurants, as part of the process of supporting them coming back online. So that was the major decision. We've really streamlined our committees, basically bringing as little as possible and trying to keep any resolutions focused on COVID-related needs. We have a command center. I'm not sure how familiar everybody is, but that command center was put in place at the health department. It's got, we've redirected a lot of our staff, obviously furloughing a lot of our staff as well. And the command center has been broken down into 4 teams. We have operations, planning, health, and I can't actually off the top of my head remember the 4th one right now. They're, obviously addressing a lot of our county needs. I can't think of any major, other updates, but I wanted to just be here to show solidarity, to thank you guys for all the work that you're doing, and happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Any questions? Yes, Cynthia.
Hi, Anna. Thanks so much for coming and speaking with us. One of the concerns that I have heard from people, and I'm hoping that you can help with, is there any effort to create sort of a database, for lack of a better term, of people who may be vulnerable in need, so that either mental health professionals or other county officials can check in on individuals who may be isolated or vulnerable or have needs, and being able to just check in with them and make sure that they're okay?
Yeah, so I know that the Department of Mental Health has, they have been working to bring themselves back up to full staff, but using telehealth systems. So if you find people who are in need, I would definitely direct them to their crisis hotline. And I know that they're working with agencies like the Alcohol and Drug Council still to provide supports. So they are providing one-on-one management, and services through that line. So that's one avenue that would be directly through the county. And I know that they're coordinating and referring out, as needed from that hub. So that's one thing I would talk about. You actually brought up another that you didn't ask this question, but I've seen this on listservs a lot. People wondering about whether or not the health system is going to provide details on cases. And I would just offer that, you know, basically what we're saying, the county is saying is the detailed on individual cases is not going to change the protocol that people should be following, which is distancing and quarantining, isolation if you have any symptoms, communication with the health department if you have any symptoms, and getting tested. And the information, if it's too detailed, has led to harassment of some subpopulations. So we're trying to be really careful. But the county is implementing a very detailed protocol on tracing once a case is identified, extensive interviews, and connecting to all the people who have been in contact with that person from the point back to the original point of symptoms, showing symptoms. For if anybody asks, that's it's quite extensive. We've got thousands of hours a week of staff time going into those interviews. It's very, very extensive. So for what it's worth, that's the protocol in place. So it wasn't your question, but I thought I'd add that as well because I've gotten that question a lot.
I have a question as well. Can you hear me, Anna?
Yeah. Hi, Laura.
Hi. A question has come up about people who wanting to get testing, but who cannot themselves get to the testing site. Do you know what provisions are being made there?
Yeah, I know they're in the process of working out the details of a system that is comprehensive and coordinated with the system that we have. They don't have like a final outline of or protocol of recommendations. I did talk to Jennifer Dodson about car share, for example, and I know they're talking to Jay Franklin. There have been offers of systems in place and then discussions of how to go about sterilization afterwards. But I know that the minute they have that, they're going to put it on the website. And as some of you have seen, I've been putting daily summaries together of all of the reference material that's been brought to my attention, anything that I've been researching, updates from the county, state, and federal. But as soon as I have that, I've been in touch with Jay, who's the head of the planning team. As soon as they have a protocol, I will put it up in my daily summary and I'll send it to all of you as well.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you. Anna, thank you for joining us. Enjoy your walk. It looks nice outside.
I will. And please take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Thanks, Anna.
Bye.
I'll go now to privilege of the floor. Would anyone on council like to take advantage of privilege of the floor? I'm not seeing anybody, but I'm trusting that means that there is nobody that wants to right now. Okay.
I think Laura had her hand up.
Oh, Laura. Yes. Sorry, Laura. Yes. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I would like to thank the public for their patience, for their efforts at social distancing, and for the comments and the questions that we've received. It has been overwhelming to see the community input and concern and questions. I think the governor's daily press conferences have been helpful and have really highlighted that we are all experiencing anxiety on a personal level, professional level, social level, economic level, but we definitely are all in this together. And it has been a challenge to reply to everyone, to listen to the numerous voice messages on phones. I know that my inbox was completely full and there was no more ability to take messages, so I apologize to the public. I think I know that Deb has recently just crafted a brilliant my phone was ringing as we were speaking. So I just want the public to know that we care, that we're listening to you, and that we are taking the steps that we view to be appropriate and possible.
Thank you. Well said. Cynthia and then George.
Sorry, I'm still learning how to do this. I want to echo Laura's statements and appreciation for everybody who's reached out. I do want to recognize just the incredible dedication that I've been witnessing. First and foremost, my colleagues in the city and the county, our incredible staff, and our medical personnel who are doing everything possible in all levels to serve our community in the best ways possible. I'm so grateful for the individuals who are continuing to work in the grocery store and other service industries, engaging with all of us, providing services to make sure that people can continue to get the food and other services that they need. It's just times like this, I've really come to appreciate all the people that day in and day out do what needs to be done to help all of us in our community lead healthy and vibrant lives. So I want to acknowledge and recognize their dedication and service.
Thank you. It's well said. George. Sorry, George, you're muted. Sorry, can't hear you.
How about now?
There you go.
Okay. So, yeah, I'm proud of this community, and I second everything Laura and Cynthia said. On a different note, I'd just like to let the city know that the barricades went up on Hector Street today, and Hector Street's going to be closed for a couple 3 months. A number of different projects are underway. We're putting the drainage, stormwater drainage underground, extending the sidewalk, and reconfiguring some of the curves on the street. So it'd be best to avoid Hector Street. If you live where you can still get to your house. That's all I have.
Got it.
Thank you, George.
Could you hear me?
Yep, heard you.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. This is a great update. Okay. Any other privilege of the floor? Okay, we'll go now then to consent agenda. Would anyone like to move the consent agenda? Moved by Deb Molinoff. Is there a second? Second by Cynthia Brock. All those in favor? All those opposed? And that carries unanimously.
Samantha, there's an echo on your, do you have something going on? There's an echo. I'm hearing an echo on your audio.
You have two devices on, so you're logged in. I think your phone. Yeah.
Is this better now?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
sorry. I'm
No
logged in
problem.
on my phone. I need to be able to look at all of you is what's going on, as well as look at my agenda. So I had to log in twice. Let me know if it starts echoing again. I need to be able to, I also want to be able to look at all of you. I didn't mean to make it sound like an obligation. Next is report of city controller, Steve Thayer. Steve, are you on the line?
I am. Can you hear me?
Can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. Okay, so this is going to be the report, current financial status report, much different than normal. Obviously, things have drastically changed in just a short period of time. So I'll go into a few things. I'll try to take it slow, and certainly if you have any questions, let me know after I'm done, and I can continue hopefully to answer your questions. Just to start off, our financial status coming into this crisis, we had some good timing, obviously. We had our first installment taxes in January, so that gave us extended cash flow. In addition, we made our larger debt payments January through March, and then we have less of debt service payments due now through mid-July. So roughly $1,300,000 is now due into July, and then that ramps up again after that point. In addition, we did issue our borrowings, our debt for 2020 in February, right before the market went into turmoil. So we were able to obtain a good interest rate there. It was just over 1%. So that's good news. But interest rates, of course, with the market turmoil have gone all over the board, and they continue to be up and down like a roller coaster at this point in time. So we're lucky we're not in the market and don't need to go in the market at this current time. In addition, early sales tax collections January through March were up about 9.7%. So that was also very good. In addition, our cash reserves on hand from 2019, we have decent reserves estimated to be about 16.5% of our activity or operations. So we have a current fund balance heading into 2020 of about $9,800,000. So those things are all very good items and very good financial backing for us as we move into this very, very difficult period ahead. Now, saying that, we have many issues facing us now. Obviously, trying to estimate what's going to happen in the short term and also in the long term becoming very, very difficult. But I can tell you, as you all know, we are pretty heavily reliant on sales tax. Our 2020 sales tax budget is $15,614,000 as approved. That's roughly 25% of our budget. And of course, property taxes are even a higher percentage of our budget. So sales tax, as we know now, is going to take a drastic hit. It's going to take a little bit of time to feel that impact because there is a lag in collections for us. For instance, our next payments are April 7th and April 10th, and these collections relate mostly to the February time period and a little bit into March. So we expect that those two collections probably will be, fairly consistent with what we've seen over the past few years, and maybe slightly less. However, the next collections in May will obviously relate to March and April periods, and along with the June, will also relate to April and some May. So we expect fully that those collections for sales tax will see a drastic, slow reduction, but a drastic reduction as we get further into the period. Again, it's so hard to estimate what we're going to see here, but what I'm projecting at this point in time is that we could lose sales tax revenue in the neighborhood of anywhere from 5 to 15% if everything is over by, if this crisis is over by the end of May. So numbers-wise, this could mean anywhere from $780,000 to $2,350,000. Again, a big range because until we see the data to back our projections, it's hard to really know exactly what's going to happen there. In addition, parking revenue, we expect, we had a budget for 2020 of a little over $3 million. We could expect to see anywhere from $675,000 to a $2 million revenue loss if this continues. And looking at other fees, of course, that will be impacted here, building permits, other building department fees, youth services and related program fees, recreation fees, our interest earnings, fines, mortgage tax, other state and federal aid will all be impacted by this crisis in some way or another. And of course, if this issue continues at any length, right now, projections that I'm looking at, will, for the short term, impacting us probably into early June. But we do know once we come out of any kind of recovery, we don't know what the future holds there. I assume that the recovery will be very slow for us, as is normal through these recovery processes, and probably go definitely into 2021. So as we look at our current budget in 2020, we have areas that can be considered to assist our cash flows if we're in need. Of course, we have our current cash on hand to help us out. We also have the ability to go out and get tax anticipation notes or revenue anticipation notes based on our tax projections and revenues if we needed to do that. Also, we have, of course, bonding available to us if we had to do something in the short term. And the bonding, our debt limit obviously is roughly about 70% exhausted already. That would give us roughly available about $40 million. However, realistically, more like $27 million would get us to around the 90% capacity, which is we wouldn't want to go too much higher than that. And of course, property taxes in the future are another revenue source. So looking at the overall picture at this current time, and of course things change on a daily basis, I could see a revenue loss for the city between 15 and 30% possible, depending on the duration of this event. So anywhere from 9 million to 20 million is possible. Obviously, huge numbers to absorb. In addition, we don't know, the stimulus bill has been passed, but other bills are possible. At this current time, we don't have any stimulus help from the government. So our state aid has not been, or they haven't said that they're looking to reimburse any of our losses at this time. And we'll have to see how that comes down the line if there's changes there made that will assist us. So what have we done currently to try to start this basically cut back budget process? We've now asked city staff to restrict all expenses to only those essential and emergency expenses during this period. In addition, we're looking very closely at any personnel vacancies and only authorizing approval of those in the absolute necessity. In addition, of course, our goal would be to keep staff levels as is. However, based on projections, this likely would be a difficult thing for us to do in the future. So I think it's probably a little too early to talk about staffing changes at this point or 2021 tax rate adjustments. But just understand that if this impact continues, it will definitely have a negative outlook for our 2020 activity and 2021 budgets. In addition, it's very likely, most likely, that we'll have to amend the 2020 city budget during this coming year as a result of the lower revenue and possible increase of any expenses. Of course, we'll get more data on that, and we're developing those numbers as we speak. Part of the stimulus bill was improved unemployment benefits. They did make a longer benefit period. I think it increased it from 26 weeks to 39 weeks and also added, I believe, $600 per week. So there is some changes in the unemployment benefits if staff changes had to be made down the line. Also, our state revenue, our state aid, just our general state aid that we receive from the state, which is currently budgeted by New York State at $2,610,000. We've talked many years about how this hasn't changed. It is very likely that the state would look at this as a possible adjustment. If they've said that their current budget includes this amount, although we don't have a current approved state budget, it is very possible that could be adjusted down the line. There's no guarantee that those funds. We've seen back in 1991, we saw that they made a change and drastically reduced that amount of money. So that is very possible as the state tries to get through their financial crisis as well. In addition, other aid as far as like CHIPS funds and those things may also see a reduction. Also, as we work through this situation, of course, it is very difficult to work on union negotiations at this point in time because there's so much uncertainty in the future. Committing to future expenses is currently very challenging. So I'm not sure how the impact will go as we have several unions that are either up or have been up as far as negotiations in their contracts and the settlement for those. So our focus does go to the cutback budgeting, and we will be doing that on a daily basis as we figure out, where we're headed. So, in addition, expect increased pension rates for 2021 as lower interest rates and investment turmoil has really thrown a wrench into the retirement gains that they expect and project for our rates. So I would fully expect that those rates would increase for 2021. So in a nutshell, not great news, obviously. I've been here almost 31 years now. I've been through many difficult and challenging times with significant financial impacts to the city, where state and federal aid was reduced in the early 90s, to recessions of the 2008 through 2010 time period. Other ups and downs, but this type of impact has never been experienced, of course. This is massive. The uncertainty is huge, and the ultimate impact at this point in time is unknown. All I can say is that, we have to work together and have full cooperation from all of our staff to move this through and hopefully prevail. And on that, I think I'll end and take any questions that people may have.
Thank you, Steve. A grim report and not at all hyperbolic. I mean, first, anybody who knows you and has worked with you knows that hyperbole is not your style. But also anybody who's watching all these indicators, and even just stepping out into the street, all the areas in which the city is funded, the places where we get our revenue, it's all dried up. So any questions? Yes, Deb.
Just really quickly, not necessarily a question, but this is the CA section. We don't have necessarily any voting items, but this is normally the time when we would start thinking about budget meetings. And I'm wondering if a few of us will want to put our heads together to think about, I know that we always try to have it done around a certain time frame. We may need an extra cushion in order to do some deliberations to figure out what aid may come in or be adjusted. So I just wanted to see if everyone might be agreeable to adding in some more November dates than we normally had, just in the event that we have to do some kind of on the fly modifications. We know it's going to be very challenging for the mayor and Steve to put this budget together. So what I'm going to just ask everybody to do is to start looking at your calendars. Hopefully we won't be having the budget process via this format, but if we have to, then we also are going to have to think about how we modify that process for this new format. So I'll work with Dan and probably Julie to get some budget dates together, and we'll try to get those on everybody's calendar as soon as possible. But everybody agreeable to that? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions, comments for Steve? Yes, George. Sorry, George, you're muted again.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Steve, what were the numbers you said for potential loss of revenue this year? Was it $9 million?
Yeah, so obviously these estimates are very difficult to project, but I was estimating, between 15 and 30%, roughly $9 million to as much as 20 million. This changes daily, but as the mayor mentioned, you just go outside and you walk down the street, and it's unbelievably sad to look around with no activity. So if this goes on for any period of time, it could get really, really ugly.
Thank you.
Graham.
Yeah, Steve, thank you. I think you'd mentioned revising the actual budget this year. Does that require additional council input, or is that something that is executive decisions?
Yeah, so if we were to amend the 2020 budget, that obviously we would come back with recommendations on that, and then council would have to approve those changes.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Sure.
Cynthia.
Okay, the space bar didn't work. You had mentioned that going forward, state aid might be adjusted. I'm presuming that's for the 2020 budget or this year's budget, as well as CHIPS funds and pension rates. And I'm going to presume medical contributions that may be adjusted for this particular budget. Is that true?
Yeah, so, right, yeah, so the 2020 budget, we are projecting as the current state budget projects of $2,600,000 in state aid, but they can adjust that at any point, and so that would be, yes, for the 2020 budget.
And so your estimate of 15 to 30% includes possible loss of state funding as well as possible increase in contributions? Does that include that number? Or is that
yeah,
having to do with revenue?
Yeah, no, that would include that number and would make it more on the higher side. So the state aid that we do receive, we normally receive roughly $338,000 in September, and then they make their final payment to us December 15th, roughly around that time. So they have plenty of time to make adjustments to that. I've been hearing, some rumblings of 25% cut there, but obviously until that budget's adopted, we don't know what they've at least have approved in the budget. And then, of course, they've all told us that they will adjust their budget as needed as these projections fall short.
Okay, I do have one follow-up question, Savante. So with regards to any previous awards that the city has received on construction projects, builds, bridges, roads, and so on, are those considered secured, or can they also be unwound? I say this in light of the recognition that the state had committed to initiate our dredging project, for example, and now I'm told that that project is on hold. So can we expect that other city contracts may also be on hold, or that those commitments may no longer be available?
I would have to say at this point in time, probably those types of projects would be they're committed and probably would be made good on by the state. It's the things like that they don't give us guarantee, like our state aid and those types of things, that they have the ability to make adjustments there.
Okay, so just I guess at some point it would be interesting to hear from Savante and others with regards to the dredging and why that particular project is suspended, but that's a different conversation. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, I'll
You're
say
welcome.
that
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
sorry, the dredging in particular, the state has now said they've reconsidered whether or not that's considered essential, in part because it's flood protection and flood control. And so they've decided that it is essential and will start up on Monday, April 6th.
And this is Ari. The other important distinction to remember for the dredging is that it was actually a state project as opposed to being state funding for a city project. The dredging is actually a state project in and of itself. So the reason they were able to stop it is that they were stopping a project that was their own project, and now they've restarted it anyway.
Okay. All right, any other questions for Steve? All right, tough. Sorry, George, were you gonna?
I feel so fortunate we got Steve on our side. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Obviously, I and all of us have never seen anything quite like this. So we just have to work together and try to wade through this one day at a time, and hopefully we can make it through. So I just wish the best of health to everybody.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks,
You
Steve.
too, Steve.
Thanks.
Should we go to, I guess let's call it the new 5.1 stuff, if that's okay?
Yes, sure. And before, I do have a resolution that I wanted to read, but before I do that, I just wanted to echo what Savante said earlier about all of the phone calls that we received over the last few days. A lot of the calls that I received were from workers that had lost their jobs. A lot of them people that I know from downtown, and all kind of echoing the same thing, which is that they just don't have enough money to pay April rent, and a concern about how they're going to pay. And Steve mentioned the unemployment benefits. There's that extra $600 a week that was included in the federal benefit. I think that's going to help a lot of people, but the problem is that the state has been overloaded by jobless claims, and the system has been really challenged to respond to everybody. People are making calls, and the money's just not coming as quickly as we hope it is. And so there's a lot of challenges right now with people being very anxious about how they're going to afford housing. The other calls we got, a lot of emails and phone calls were from landlords. I'd say particularly smaller landlords. The majority of landlords in Tompkins County are 10 units or less. These are people who have worked very hard to build their livelihoods, and they're facing a situation where people are not able to pay the rent. It's a very frightening time. They have to pay mortgage payments, they have to pay taxes, they have to pay insurance. And so between two of these groups, I came up with this resolution that's basically calling on the state to waive rents for a 90-day period, and also mortgage payments. And this should also be paired with relief, both for unemployed workers, additional relief, and also for landlords who are struggling to pay their expenses. I did have a couple questions just before that, because one thing that has come up again and again is the question of whether the city is able to do this, whether the city has the power to do this, whether the city has the legal authority to do this. And I see that Ari is here. I wanted to get just some clarity on that. What is the city able to do in terms of a rent freeze or not?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Seth. Yeah, unfortunately, there are two legal constraints there. The first is that actually three really. The first is that the governor's executive orders have prohibited municipalities across the state, thus including the city, from issuing emergency orders related to the current crisis. And because this the proposed rent freeze would, of course, be a result of the current crisis, we don't have that authority without additional permission from the state. The second constraint, which is also a legal one, is that it is definitely legally questionable to be able to enact a rent freeze that would actually permanently wipe those rents off the books, so to speak. And in contrast, it would be far more legally tenable if it were the government that were, of course, coming in and actually making landlords whole for the rents that weren't paid under a rent freeze, which brings up the third problem, which is that, as we just heard from Steve, the city's finances are in tatters, or will be soon, more exactly, and we would need the money to make those landlords whole in order for this to be a viable legal path.
Thanks. All right. And just before I read this resolution, I do want to say, and this is actually included in the resolution, but what I've heard again and again from the people who have been calling is that this is not a call for us to freeze rents across the board. I mean, the idea is that people should still be paying their rent if they can. The state passed a halted evictions, so for 90 days. So what that means that nobody's getting kicked out of their house in the next week or next 2 weeks or month during that 90-day period. But the concern is if somebody goes into debt to their landlord, what happens, 4 months down the line, 5 months down the line, when these restrictions are lifted? Are they going to suddenly have to owe a bunch of back rent? That is the concern I've heard over and over again, that the concern isn't with just right now with getting kicked out of someone's home. It's really what happens down the line when the eviction order is relaxed. So I'll go ahead and read this, and then I suppose we can dig into it and have a discussion about it. So this is a resolution of support for Ithaca tenants and landlords. Whereas in response to the outbreak of COVID-19, New York State has mandated containment measures, including the closure of schools and non-essential businesses. And whereas the containment protocol of COVID-19 in the city of Ithaca continues to have a severe impact on the local economy, leading to widespread job losses and reduction in wages and income of Ithaca residents. And whereas on March 20th, 2020, New York State declared a 90-day statewide moratorium on evictions, and New York State courts have suspended all eviction proceedings and pending eviction orders. And whereas residents of the city of Ithaca who have suffered job losses or a reduction in income are in additional need of assistance, particularly low-income families. Whereas landlords in the city of Ithaca, particularly landlords with smaller property holdings, have been dealt a financial blow by the present crisis and are also in need of assistance. And whereas legislation has been introduced in the New York State Senate and the New York State Assembly that would suspend rent payments for 90 days of residential tenants and small business commercial tenants who have suffered a loss of income as a result of COVID-19 restrictions. Whereas this legislation also provides relief for landlords who are suffering financial hardship as a result of a loss of rent payments, allowing them to waive mortgage payments for a period of 90 days. Whereas the recently passed federal stimulus bill provides much needed support in the form of expanded unemployment benefits and direct cash payments to individuals and families, and expands SBA loans for small businesses. And whereas additional relief is needed to support unemployed workers, including undocumented and under the table workers, and to extend mortgage forbearance to landlords and help them meet financial obligations such as tax liabilities, utility payments, and insurance premiums. Whereas residents and small business commercial tenants who have been minimally affected by COVID-19 restrictions and are able to meet their rent and mortgage obligations are expected and encouraged to do so. Now therefore be it resolved that the Common Council of the City of Ithaca hereby urges our state representatives to support legislation that for a 90-day period would suspend the rent payments of residential tenants and small business commercial tenants who have suffered a loss of income as a result of COVID-19 restrictions, and suspend mortgage payments for the same period for property owners facing financial hardship as a result of non-payment of rent. Be it further resolved that the Common Council of the City of Ithaca urges our state and federal representatives to pair any suspension of rent due to COVID-19 hardship with additional relief to help unemployed workers and emergency funding to assist landlords who are facing financial hardship due to non-payment of rent. And I so move.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second by Donna Fleming. Discussion. I'll give Seth my appreciation for drafting this resolution. You know, I really badly think we need a nationwide program to help renters, and I think that should be a rent freeze, i.e. You can tell the federal, ideally, but failing that, the state government, what your rent was, how short you're going to be, and they should come through with a check to you or a check to your landlord. I really believe we need that because of my own experience. You, all of you know that my family's experienced homelessness before, and I think all of you know that the reason we were able to build a secure, if never comfortable, home life was because we had support, both government supports and supports in the community. But those community supports are in real danger of eroding right now. We've never seen unemployment at this level, never, ever, ever. And it's going to get worse before it gets better, both COVID and the economic fallout. And so I'm worried about it. I'm worried as a renter, even though I'm blessed to still have an income. I'm worried for my mom, who's a renter here in Ithaca, for my brother, both brothers and sisters who are renting all across the country. And so I think it's the right move. I do regret that we couldn't do it locally. I know that some of the organizers were like, well, you really could do this if you pushed the boundaries, if you, so it wasn't in my powers and the mayor's emergency powers, but they made the case that council could give me additional emergency powers and then I could make this declaration. Even if that worked, we would have to then get approval from the governor and the Department of Health. We've heard that they're not granting any approvals, especially for something this forward thinking, which is too bad. But even then, if they had approved this, we would have likely been facing a series of lawsuits that you know, and Ari says, and I believe him, we would have been on the losing side of landlord, and then landlords would have been evicting tenants who thought they were under the protection of the city of Ithaca. So I don't think enacting a local rent freeze would have accomplished what we want to accomplish. But I do think that we all need to be shouting from the mountaintops. I'm really concerned that our federal representatives don't understand it yet, because they're not seeing what it's like out here. I mean, they're not seeing, and our community is a little bit different, yes, because it relies on higher education, and when the college is shut down, it's a huge shock. But there are waves of shocks coming, and I'm seeing a lot of federal representatives who passed this last stimulus, and they're saying, well, we did our part, and they're ready to walk away, and I think that's a real big mistake. So I will continue to push for rent freeze, rent forgiveness, and reimbursement for landlords. And all of my conversations with our congressional delegation and delegations across the country. But thanks again, Seth, for writing this. I think it's great. I have Cynthia, then Donna, and then Seth for now.
Thank you, Savante. I agree with you 100%. What is very interesting about this current situation is it has fully revealed the vulnerability of our community. And ours is generally considered an economically secure community because of our universities and, of course, our medical center and other essential services. And yet we see such a high level of impact on our residents. We are seeing that we have a large part of our economy that is based on the hospitality industry, an industry that tends to have individuals who are not receiving a living wage, who have very little job security. We have a growing reliance on gig work and an informal employment economy in our community. And these are positions that lack not only job security, they lack benefits, they lack continuity. And so they were, of course, the most vulnerable and the most impacted. We also have a situation, to add insult to injury, where a big portion of our population pays more than 30% of their income on rent. And so even if they do receive assistance, it doesn't come near to meeting their rent obligations, let alone leaving money available for food and the ability to insure themselves and so on. I fully recognize that there are a huge portion of individuals who are not going to receive the government assistance that has been put out. Individuals who are fresh out of school, who don't have an employment history, that are now on their own, and so therefore can't apply for unemployment. I also recognize that unemployment is based on the theory that it's not meant to replace a person's income. It provides a small subsidy to encourage people to get back to work and continue looking for work. They can't do that. They can't look for work, they can't get back to work, and the unemployment insurance that they receive will not in any way meet their obligation, because it wasn't designed to be something to provide that kind of subsistence income. So, you know, this is a system that was never intended to be used the way that it has to be used now. Like all insurance systems, which is what unemployment is, it is always intended and is structured where only a small number of individuals are actually going to be receiving payouts because the majority of people are healthy and so on. And now that's not the situation. So I'm not even sure the vibrancy of our unemployment insurance trust funds and their ability to continue functioning for the long term. So I think this speaks to, as we look to the future, our need to diversify our economy, so we don't have a large portion of it based on the hospitality industry, the need to focus on building jobs that provide job security and benefits and a living wage, and reinforces to all of us that we need to focus on getting our rent levels back to reasonable levels so we don't have such a high population of individuals in our community who are rent burdened and paying more than 30% of their income on rent. I think we are doing what we need to do, and we will continue as requested to advocate with the state to try to provide whatever services available to allow our community to continue to function and be secure, both in their housing and food stability through these coming months. And I appreciate the messages that were received and the voices that were shared with me with everybody's concerns.
Thank you. Next is Donna and then Seth.
Hi, everybody. I have talked to lots of people since Monday morning at 9 o'clock when we started getting calls. I've listened to the voicemail messages. I think I was assigned a group of about a dozen people who called me 3 times, so I've talked to a few people a few times. I've heard some interesting and sad stories, kind of a range of stories. And I've commented to several people that this crisis has highlighted a lot of weaknesses in the US economy already. Everything from the kind of spotty access to internet, which more and more people are relying on now. I mean, imagine kids kicked out of who aren't in school now who don't have internet either. So that's a problem. Our lousy public health care system. I mean, my daughter commented in anger last week, since when does the United States care about public health anyway? So we need a lot more national investment in public health so that we have fewer people with pre-existing conditions anyway. Yes, housing, pretty weak public education, such that now a lot of people can't discern truth from fiction in the media. And of course, our terrible medical insurance system. So this crisis has highlighted all those things, and we have a hell of a lot of work to do on the other side. Regarding this particular issue, I've been consistent with people I've talked to say why I cannot support a city rent freeze. And it's what people have summarized earlier. First of all, it's not in our purview. Secondly, it shouldn't be done without means testing, because there are some people who can pay rent. The city doesn't have the staff to administer a means testing program. Program shouldn't be in place that doesn't compensate landlords. And the city certainly doesn't have funds to compensate landlords. So I think this was the right step to look to the state for statewide legislation that would address these issues. And I'm grateful to Seth for having drafted the resolution.
Thank you. Next is Seth and then Graham.
Well, I wanted to say that, like the legislation we're calling for, I mean, this isn't a perfect solution. I mean, there's a lot of bills in Albany right now. There's a lot of assembly members and senators figuring out how to move forward with this, just as we're trying to figure out how to move forward with this at the local level. And, I kind of see this as this step as really pushing the state to examine this issue and to move forward with it in a serious way. But again, it isn't perfect. I mean, obviously these are unbelievably unprecedented times where we find ourselves. And the one thing I wanted to say locally, because I have heard, there are a lot of people who have lost their jobs, but there are also a lot of people who are still drawing a salary. And I really want to encourage all of those people to continue to pay their rent. I think the message needs to be, if you can't pay your rent, you're going to be okay. Don't pay your rent if you can't pay your rent. food is probably the priority right now. If you can pay some of your rent, you should pay some of your rent. If you can pay all of your rent, pay your rent, because what that will do is it not only will help these smaller landlords who are struggling right now, trying to figure out how they're going to move forward, who are very scared at seeing their whole livelihoods disappear, who are worried themselves about being out on the street. It will also help the city of Ithaca, it will help the school district, it will help the county, because a big part of that rent goes towards taxes. You know, that sometimes people don't think that renters pay taxes, but they do. Their rent is going to taxes. And those taxes pay for school teachers, they pay for firefighters, they pay for nurses in the county. These are people who are actually at the front lines of dealing with this crisis. So I really would encourage everybody who can pay to pay your rent. And I also wanted to say, on top of that, we're about to get, I think, it's $1,200 from the federal government. I saw that there was an op-ed in the Ithaca Voice written by somebody who I thought came up with a very good proposal. If you don't need that $1,200, right? If you have a job, if you're working, the idea of redistributing that locally, sending it to a foundation, we have the Community Foundation, we have the Robbins Fund, which helps people who are facing challenges in their life. There's a lot of really good local resources where that money could be put to. And I will say that I have been so struck by the generosity that I've seen in this community. I mean, this is an incredibly challenging time on all fronts. I mean, with people worried about how they're going to not only pay for their rent, but mental health concerns, as many have brought up, issues with our healthcare system. But this community, I think, as it always does when it's confronted with a challenge, has really stepped up. And I've been impressed at all of the support that I've seen from neighbors, supporting other neighbors, checking in on them, stepping up to do everything from making masks to trying to volunteer at food pantries. There's been a really incredible outpouring of generosity. So it's something I certainly want to see continue, and I want to put this resolution forward in that spirit.
Thank you. Graham.
Find the button. Thank you. Seth, I wanted to thank you and other colleagues that worked on this. I think this is a wonderful response. We've all had a lot of calls. I just want to apologize. I haven't been able to get to all of those. I've tried as much as I can, but I think that concern that's been expressed just emphasizes what a difficult situation we're in right now. I did have a question about, and I've heard a couple of comments from homeowners with lower incomes that are struggling to think about their mortgage payments. And I know this is rightly focused on renters and landlords because that's the majority of housing in Ithaca. But I am just worried or concerned that, and I don't know the situation in terms of lower income homeowners that are going to be struggling with their mortgage payment. And I don't know, Seth, if you had any thoughts on that or whether we should consider that at a later stage. But I fully support this. I think just to reiterate the comments that people have been made about the really positive response to this crisis that I've seen in the community in terms of people that I work with, but also my neighbors. A lot of the students up here in College Town are still here, but they really are now responding and recognize the situation. And I just want to give a shout out to the co-op up here in College Town. I think many students would be completely devastated without that resource in terms of local food. So just give a shout out to the co-op. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? Has been moved into, yes, Laura.
Thank you. I agree with all the comments made by my colleagues already. I just wanted to add a few additional points to Seth's point that those who have not lost their jobs as a result of the current crisis, who are able to work, who are working at home, and who can afford to pay their rent, I just wanted to comment that that will also potentially allow their landlords to be flexible if they have a range of tenants at different income levels. I've heard from some renters whose landlords have been flexing with them. Landlord, for example, who agreed to use the last month deposit to pay half of the April rent and half of the May rent so that the renters don't have the full burden of their rent. So we've heard from a number of renters that their landlords are being flexible. At the same time, we have heard from some renters who have said that they are aware that some landlords may be charging or thinking of charging late fees. And I think anything we can do to encourage our local landlords to work, as Deb has said in her very well-crafted statement, encourage landlords to work with compassion with their residents, recognizing it puts some of the onus on the renters, but if the renters and their landlords can work together, that can be for the benefit, the overall benefit as well.
Thank you. Any further comment? Declan.
I'll just say briefly that I too apologize for not getting back to everybody. It's gotten well over 100, so I think the organization is very impressive, and they should be commended for being so engaged and understand, like reading city code, which most residents don't do, making suggestions. It may not, our city attorney's opinion on it and our reading of the law may not be the same, but it's impressive that someone went through and looked for potential solutions. And I do feel really frustrated and helpless that we can't do more. So I apologize for that too. And so, yeah, we're going to fight at the state and federal level to get something done for people who need help.
Yeah, and I'll just say, for me, what that thing is, so the rent assistance is good. I think we need more direct checks. I think we need more universal income. $1,200 was a good start, but we needed to repeat next month. And I believe at the very least the month after that, because without that, we're not going to see the kind of stability that we need to see to keep people maintaining their social distance, to stop underground economies from forming, but also to stop the fear and lawlessness and desperation that leads people to break contracts and to turn on each other and frankly, very frankly, leads to violence. And we know that when the economy goes down, domestic assaults goes up, assaults on children go up, and crime in general goes up. And we can't afford to see that either. So I hope everybody will keep pushing their federal representatives to do more to send checks directly to people who need them. Did I see Rob? Were you about to raise your hand? Or yes, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Devante. And I just wanted to add my support to the resolution and also to thank Seth and others for pulling this together. And also, again, we've all been dealing with lots of phone calls. I apologize that my schedule hasn't really allowed me to been able to engage with people around the phone calls, but doing my best to keep up with listening to all those voicemails. And I hope that that we'll be able to move this forward and just sort of take it one step at a time in meeting this crisis. But thank you all for doing that.
Thanks, George.
I'd like to thank all my colleagues for their work this week. And Savante took a picture from the top of City Hall this afternoon, or maybe it was a couple days ago, at rush hour, and Green Street was empty. And Steve Thayer made a comment about walking down the Commons. I agree that we need our state and federal representatives to understand what's going on in our community. And we often invite them for and do a little tour. And hopefully that would emphasize the fact that their constituents need their help.
Yeah, I agree. Further thoughts before we vote? I'd like to propose, because on the YouTube stream, it only comes up for the folks who are speaking. So Julie, what do you think if we take roll call votes for this meeting? Every vote functions as a roll call vote so people can see how everybody votes instead of just me saying it.
I was actually planning on switching to the gallery view so everybody could see the raised hands when the votes come.
That's even better. Okay. Are we ready to vote? Okay. Are we in gallery view? I should pull up the YouTube stream too so I can keep track.
Yes, we are.
Okay. Then I'll ask, are all those in favor of Alderperson Murtaugh's resolution? Those opposed? So that carries unanimously, 10-0. Thank you, Seth. Appreciate it. We'll move now to the normal 5.1. Is there any reason to move around, Seth, the things in your agenda? Out of PEDC, or should we do it in this order? Start with the bridge.
Just give me a sec. I gotta pull this up. This is the bridge.
Yep.
Yeah, we could go ahead with the bridge.
Okay.
I just have to pull this up real quick. So I'm gonna move. I'll move alternative 2, and I won't read all of this out. But just 5.1, a South Cayuga Street Bridge project. Design alternatives decision number 2. So the existing South Cayuga Street Bridge, it's a single span bridge, 2-lane multiple steel bridge carrying South Cayuga Street over the 6 Mile Creek. As part of the approved 2018 budget, Common Council already authorized $155,000 to cover the cost of participation in scoping and preliminary design phases, and an additional $25,000 to cover project administration costs. Whereas an additional $210,000 has been made available from the New York State Department of Transportation to cover the cost of participated in detailed design. Whereas on June 6, 2018, the City of Ithaca Common Council amended budget to add $210,000 for a total of $390,000. Currently, the City of Ithaca and project consultant Delta Engineers are working on the project. There have been 3 different alternatives for this bridge that we've been considered. The first alternative would include a bridge rehabilitation with 13-foot lanes and 5-foot and 5-inch sidewalks. The alternative 2, which also includes the bridge rehabilitation, 13-foot lanes and 8-foot sidewalks, including widening the substructure, and bridge alternative 3, which includes full bridge replacement, 13-foot lanes and 8-foot sidewalks. And all of these come with much different overall costs, which are listed there under design alternatives. And resolved that the City of Ithaca Common Council hereby selects alternative 2 as the preferred alternative with an estimated total project cost of $2,564,000. Be it further resolved that the City of Ithaca Common Council hereby amends the budget to add $2,174,000 for a total of $2,564,000. That the resolve that the funds needed for said project shall be derived from the issuance of serial bonds with the city's estimated share of the project cost not to exceed 30.97% or $794,000. And it is further resolved that in the event the full federal and non-federal share cost of the project exceeds the amount appropriated above, Common Council of the City of Ithaca shall convene as soon as possible to appropriate said excess amount immediately upon the notification by New York State Department of Transportation thereof. Be it further resolved that the mayor and the City of Ithaca of the County of Tompkins be and is hereby authorized to sign all necessary agreements with the New York State Department of Transportation to secure the necessary aid for the project. Resolved that the Superintendent of Public Works be and is hereby authorized to administer the above project. Be it further resolved that a certified copy of this resolution be filed with the New York State Commissioner of Transportation by attaching it to any necessary agreement in connection with the project. And it is further resolved that this resolution shall take effect immediately. And I so move.
Is there a second? Seconded by Graham. Thanks. Discussion.
Well, I'll just say that we had a discussion about this at PEDC, and obviously that was a very different world back then. I mean, quite a bit has changed since we talked about this bridge project, and you know, we felt that it would be good to forward this on with both alternatives just to allow the full council to choose. And I believe, is Tim available if there are questions?
I see Adisu.
Yeah, I'm here.
Eric. Oh, and Tim is here as well. Great. Great. Yes, questions, thoughts? Seth, if you want to start, and then I have George and Donna.
Well, I think the big thing on everybody's mind is obviously the financial picture for the city. And you know, we had one constituent who emailed and was basically like, cancel all capital projects. I mean, is there a concern about this now, that, you know, just given the change that we're all experiencing and its impact to the economy and its impact to the city budget, moving forward with this and any other capital project that we might consider?
Yeah.
I don't know who that's a question for you.
Yeah, I mean, I had Donna and George first, so I'll call on them and then I'll share my thinking.
So I think my thinking has changed. I think I'm okay with option 1 because you get the same lifespan, 35 to 40 years, with 300,000 fewer dollars spent by the city. I mean, sure, I'd love it if we did option 3 and rebuilt the whole thing, and it would work the last 75 years. I mean, that would be a smart investment, but I don't think we can do it right now. So I'm okay going with option number 1, which was actually the original plan anyway, to just repair what's there. City share would be 444,000, which is in the budget. And it would have another 30 to 4 years of service. So I would be willing to make that amendment after a little bit of discussion to see what the feeling is.
George?
Yeah, I don't know if everybody saw the email that Tim sent late this afternoon, but that helped me quite a bit because staff actually thinks that choice number 3 is better than choice number 2. But that, as Donna just pointed out, option number 1 was the original plan and staff's comfortable with that. So I really like option 3. I don't think we can afford it now. We may be able to afford it in a few years. I think I support option number 1. But I'd like to know from Tim and maybe the engineer whether we need to do this year at all.
Yeah, Tim?
We are still in design. This project will go into construction next year. So typically our financing runs a couple of years after that. I can let Adisu and Joe give us the technical classification on the bridge, but if you've walked across those sidewalks, you'd think it's necessarily in need of repair work. I'd like to keep this bridge on schedule, but I'm comfortable with the idea, considering Steve's report, that I'm going back to the original scope of the more straightforward rehabilitation project. Seems totally reasonable at this point, but I would like to keep the project on schedule. I think it would be important.
Yeah, and I would, I've got Laura next, but I just want to say I would, were it up to me, I would go with option 1 now. I think we're in a place where, you know, when times are good, you might remember a couple years ago. So it took us a very long time to build our way out of deficits. We were running annual deficits, and after the last recession, and it meant often that we had to raise our taxes quite a lot, and we had to really watch our spending and cut, and we decommissioned some infrastructure. And 2 years ago, around 2, maybe 3 years ago, we turned a corner where we were actually running surpluses. We were able to lower the tax rate, and we were able to do more investment both in our employees and in our infrastructure. And I said then that we were in a make hay while the sun shines kind of moment. You know, the reason you make hay is because you've got grass, but you want it to last long. You want it to last longer than grass lasts, so you turn it into hay and it'll stay in the winter. And so you make hay when the sun shines, and that meant then, that there were a lot of different places, different versions of grass, and the infrastructure is one of them. Infrastructure is a great place to put money when you've got it, to invest a little bit more than you would otherwise. Go for the option that'll last you 75 years instead of 35 years. And we've made a bunch of those decisions in the last few years to opt for the more expensive project because it was a smarter investment long term. Suddenly the sun's not shining anymore. There's no opportunities to make hay. This is when you open up the barn and you eat the hay that you made. I guess the horses eat hay, but you know what I'm trying to say. So I think even a month ago we were in a scenario 3 environment where I would have supported scenario 3, but I really think now we have to go with the less expensive option just because of all the hard choices we'll be forced to make in the coming months and all the sacrifices that we'll have to make, our constituents will have to make, and our employees will have to make. So I would agree with scenario 1. Laura?
Yeah, I completely agree for the reasons that are mentioned to go with option 1. It gives us a service life on the bridge of 35 to 40 years still, and it does not rely on any CHIPS funding as I look at the proposals. And as Steve pointed out, the CHIPS funding may not be there given the current circumstances. So I think it's the better option for a number of reasons. I do agree with going ahead with the project. I think this project will create some jobs, some design and building jobs as it comes to fruition. So I do support option 1.
Cynthia.
This question is for Adisu.
Yes.
Hi, Adisu.
Hey, Cynthia, how are you?
I'm good. So I do know that when the city had recently undertaken a flood hazard study, and in that study, one of the remedies that was put forward in terms of dealing with what are increasingly more extreme weather events is to address pinpoints in our major waterways that include bridges, for example. I do believe that alternative 1, which I support given our current financial situation, does not include the refurbishment or realignment of the bridge abutments. That's why it's cheaper. But given the expectation that in the next 30 to 40 years, we are going to be seeing more extreme weather events, do you see our not taking this opportunity to realign those ridge abutments as being something that might be a missed opportunity at this point because of weather changes and how this impacts our community?
Okay, so we there were like 3 scour critical bridges in our on our categories, which are Brindley Street, Lake Street Bridge, and one more. I forgot which one. But South Kaiga Street Bridge is not on that list, which means it's not on risk of collapsing in a flooding event. And I don't expect that by taking or by picking alternative 1, we will risk any kind of flooding event or any risk of losing the structures, even though we invest like millions of dollars. So I'll be comfortable with alternative 1, and Joe from Delta Engineers and his inputs, but we will have that risk of losing the structure by just picking alternative number 1.
Thank you, Adisu. Appreciate that.
Okay, as far as as far as the hydraulics, there is sufficient clearance between the design flood and the low steel, and we would be matching the low steel when we reconstruct it. And as Adisa mentioned, there is this is not in the scour critical list that those two bridges that he noted in the North Aurora was similar to that, where we had to address something during design. This bridge is actually on rock. Some of the scour protection that's currently there, we'll probably be doing some work with that to make sure that it fills a couple undermining situations that we have. But we're certainly comfortable going with alternate one. I think the whole thing was try to accommodate the future development with an 8-foot sidewalk, a wider sidewalk to be more comfortable for pedestrians, similar to what we did, down on East Clinton Street Bridge, to keep room between the bikes, the cars, and the pedestrians walking over there. So I think that was the intent, but certainly what I've heard today with the situation with the city, alternate one seems prudent. I would think the prudent option at this point.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Seth?
Does that mean we need an amendment? I mean, I could just amend the resolution to choose option one.
I believe so, but Ari, help me out here. So the planning committee forwarded scenario 2 and 3, right?
Yeah.
Would adding back scenario 1 at this point, would there be a need to circulate it, do a public hearing?
No, we don't. No. Yeah, okay. we can go ahead right with it. No, that's fine.
Okay, and then Adisa, I saw your hand.
Yeah. So when I prepared those two resolutions, I didn't prepare one for alternative number 1. I only assume that's just a default options. One way or the other, we're gonna go ahead with number 1. So I only prepared number 2 and number 3. So for construction, currently we only have a budget for preliminary design and final design. And at some point, probably at the end of this year, I'll come to you guys to authorize construction funding. So probably Tim could also help me here. I mean, again, we could just say, stick with the original plan, which is alternative 1. And I think I'll be fine. I mean, without any resolution or any vote. I mean, does that work for you guys?
Yes, Donna?
So are you saying that we just vote this one down and then it automatically defaults to number 1?
That's my my thinking. Yeah.
Okay.
Ari, does that sound right to you?
I think it does, as long as that's the legislative history, it does. I need to look back at that legislative history to double check, but I'd say if Adisa, as long as you're confident of that, yes, that's right.
Okay. Tim?
I was just going to ask, Adisa, we'll need to come back for the resolution for construction funding, correct?
Yeah, so the plan is if council choose alternative 1, our engineers, Delta engineers could finalize the design and we'll be able to bid the project by the end of this year or early next year. So by then we'll just, or before that, we will come to Common Council and ask for construction funding. So that's the process. And somehow we hoped, like last month or a few months ago, alternative 2 and 3 is kind of a viable option for sake of, accommodating pedestrians. But again, if we just vote down both alternative, our default alternative will be alternative 1, and that would be fine with that. And for the schedule, Joe could also explain what our plan is in terms of finalizing the final design report. Yeah, we actually have the final design report or draft design report with alternative 1 done. So we could turn that around pretty quick, and we'd have to get just get design approval from the state. And if we can get that, and they've seen that, so I don't see any major issues with that. When we certainly be able to get final design done so we could advertise this probably early in 2021, January, what have you, so that, and then they'd be ready to go to construction in the spring of 2021. But that would be the current schedule right now. We've got the design report basically done for Alt 1.
Okay. Further questions, comments? Dustin.
I'll just comment. I appreciate that staff tried to get, so I generally, well, I think the data shows that narrower travel lanes are safer for cyclists because it slows down the traffic. And so I appreciate that staff in this memo attempted to advocate for that, and that DOT is a little inflexible or behind the times or whatever it is. And I hope that with future advocacy, we can get them to reconsider. But yeah, I would have liked to have gotten 8-foot wide sidewalks any way I could, but I agree. Under the circumstances, if we can just maintain the status quo for another 3 decades, then so be it.
Yeah. So question, Tim, for keeping this on track. The one thing we are hearing talk of, and we'll press the congressman on a bit harder tomorrow, is that the next round of stimulus will be an infrastructure package. Now, I know what you're saying. Every week since January 20th, 2017 is supposed to be infrastructure week. The president ran on and promised $1 trillion infrastructure package, and it hasn't never even made it out of committee, much less to a vote. But these are being extraordinary times. They're talking about a stimulus of $2 trillion or even more. If that were to happen, say in the next month, if that were to get voted on and approved in the next month, and the money went to the states and then made its way down to municipalities sometime this fall, would we be able to reconsider this vote? My point is that what's the date of no return, where we can't say, okay, actually, instead of just replacing the deck, we do want to replace the entire bridge?
My sense is we could probably table this for another month and then, or two maybe even, and then if it didn't come through, we'd still be all right to move forward into next year construction with the rehabilitation. If the big federal stimulus act was to come along and there was additional funding, we would need additional design time anyway, and the construction would probably go from 2021 to 2022. But it would be useful to know that obviously as soon as possible. I'd look at Joe and Disu and make sure I'm not going too far afield here, but I think we could wait a month or two if you just wanted to sit on this just in case.
Yeah, I think, yeah, 1 month definitely to, what that puts us into June. Yeah, I think we have that time, and we would just have to pick it up to get it designed done if we say we're going ahead in June, but I'm pretty confident we can get that done.
Well, then I would suggest that we wait. I mean, if our actual preferred alternative is 2 or 3, but we will take 1 because we don't have the money. And if money is going to come from the federal government, they'll be looking for shovel-ready projects. This might be that shovel-ready project. I think it doesn't hurt us to wait a month and see if the bill passes, what's in it, how it looks. Things are moving pretty, usually a month doesn't seem like that far away. But the speed the federal government's been moving over the last 10 days, a month might be a long time. So that would be my suggestion. But I can't move it. Does anybody want to move to table, or George, another idea?
I'll move to table.
Thank you. Is there a second by Steve Smith? Any discussion? Yes, Donna.
So I just want to make clear. So we move to table and then we table, and then if the bucket of money doesn't come, then we vote for or we just allow number 1 to be the default in May when we're together?
Or we actually, right. Or we actually vote down the resolution.
Got it.
And then number 1 becomes the default.
Got it. Okay, so we'll just do, if the money doesn't come, then we'll do in May what we would otherwise have done tonight.
Yep.
Got it.
Yes, Adisa.
So do I have to go to PEDC or CA or just directly to you guys?
I think we'll bring it directly back to council, but we'll keep an eye on the federal bill. If something passes before PEDC, maybe we will want to discuss it back at the committee.
Okay.
Yes, George.
You're muted,
Sorry, George, you're
George.
muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Sorry. I know this is kind of splitting hairs, but the state, the suggestion to have 10-foot driving lanes, is it possible to make option number 1 with 12-foot driving lanes and give us a little bit more sidewalk on each side of the street? Like 6 feet instead of 5.5?
We can look at that again. I believe the answer is no. I think 13 is the narrowest shared lane that they'll allow for vehicle and
bikes.
I can't
Sorry,
hear
was that-
anybody now.
Oh, sorry, George. I thought you were finishing that.
Well, it's the narrowest to have a shared lane with bicycle traffic, and then that, the area through the city there warrants bicycle use. So the minimum shared lane is the 3 feet shoulder there, and that's with the 11-foot. I think it's 11-foot lanes we have. So we could revisit that, as Tim said, but I mean, I don't think that's acceptable. I think the 3-foot lanes, shared lane for a bike. And then the minimum, the sidewalk we have there allows us to reuse the existing substructures without widening.
Yeah, you guys know the deal. I just was wondering.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. So we got a motion to table. All those in favor? Any opposed? It looks like that will carry unanimously. So thank you. Sorry that this just one more thing that's been thrown into limbo, but we appreciate all of you joining us tonight.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Thank
Adisa.
you.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Adizu.
Thank you.
Next, 5.2.
5.2 is the creation of a capital project for the survey of the Green and Seneca Street intercity bus locations. Whereas section 346.31 of the city code states that no bus shall operate, stop on, or stand on any city street, nor shall such bus pick up or discharge passengers on any city street or curb or any other public property or within 200 feet of any city bus stop in the corporate limits of the city of Ithaca, unless a permit is obtained from the Common Council or its designee. Whereas Common Council passed resolutions to allow the use of 131 East Green Street and 130 East Seneca Street as intercity bus stops, whereas the operations of intercity buses in downtown has been an asset to local businesses, provides a convenient connection to TCAT, thereby encouraging use of public transportation. Whereas feedback has been received that the current space does not adequately accommodate buses, rideshare vehicles, and pedestrians. Now therefore be it resolved that the Common Council approves the establishment of a capital project in the amount of $25,000 to be funded by bus permit fees for the purpose of establishing an engineering survey. The survey will be used in the design of an improved bus stop for the intercity buses at 131 East Green Street and 130 East Seneca Street. And I so move.
Moved by Seth. Is there a second? Second by Laura. Discussion. Yes, Donna.
Did this go through planning? I don't remember it.
I don't think it did. I think it was added to it was a late addition to the agenda.
Okay. So what would we have used this bus permit fee for if we weren't using it for this? I know we've spent a lot of staff time has been used on this bus stop project. So I wonder what we had designated these funds for, or what could we use these funds for if we don't use it for this?
That's a good question. is Joanne or Jennifer?
Eric is.
Eric's here, okay.
I want to just add though, just so legally, Ari, correct me if I'm wrong, but we could use these funds on anything we wanted. We could use this to build a new playground in Stewart Park. But it was council's intention, and I think it's smart to use these funds to help improve the intercity bus situation in some way. But
Yeah, that's
no legal restrictions are, is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's no legal restriction. It's not a special benefit assessment or anything like that. It's just general fund revenue. It can be spent on anything. And in terms of areas we're already spending it on, to the question that was just asked, one area to remember, in addition to lots and lots of staff time, is we've effectively spent it on lost revenue in other areas. Like we eliminated parking spaces, and made some other changes that actually reduced city revenue streams that used to come to the city in order to create the bus situation, the current setup, and that is one area that we're effectively spending these revenues on every day.
Cynthia.
Maybe this is a Steve question. I'm presuming that we have a fund of bus permit fees that we've been receiving that is funded. Why is this being set up as a capital project, which makes me think that we're borrowing money for this? Do we not have money in the fund that was that it receives bus permit fees that can just spend $25,000?
Well, that was the request in the resolution, that it just be taken out of the fund that's been established in the money that's come in from the buses. So
okay,
it
says a capital project, so I'm
yeah,
not sure.
I don't know if that's an inappropriate term for funding it out of that source or not.
Okay, so we're not borrowing. It's not technically a capital project the way we think of a capital project. It is
That's
a
correct.
project to be funded by the pool of money that receives the bus permit fees.
Correct. Yeah, and so far those fees to date are $163,000 is what we've collected to date. Now that's in some ways difficult to quantify because of the things that Ari and others have pointed out. There's been a lot of staff time, lost parking revenue, other sorts of things. So you can't just think about it, as purely what could be invested in a capital project, but that's certainly one option. Or I won't use that term capital project, I'll say in a infrastructure project.
Yes, Cynthia.
As we
and then go.
So Ari, sorry, you're going to say something. Ari.
Well, I'm sorry. I should wait for Svante to recognize me.
Okay.
Okay.
So I guess what I'm hearing then, if this is a fund that's available to do other things, and we might be looking for funds to do other things at this point, how essential is it to do an engineering survey at this time?
Sure. Well, it's a really good question, and that's why you bring it to council. From the start, about a year and a half ago, when the intercity buses started operating, pretty early on, we noticed some issues. We certainly got a lot of feedback, and you're all very familiar with that. So the message from staff has been since that time that eventually, if we decide that we're going to keep operations going on Green Street and then now on Seneca Street, that we would come back and say the next step is to do some design and then do a capital project. And now the timing, couldn't be worse to try to consider doing that. So we're just trying to be consistent with the message so far, but it's very understandable if now is not the time to do something like this. Just a couple of things to consider related to it is potential timing. If we were to start doing a survey now at this point, and the survey is sort of the baseline to do anything, even if we would just want to do lighting, you need to do a survey so you don't put the light in through some other utility that's in the sidewalk. So I do think it's sort of a minimum that we could do at this point. But at the same time, and we would eventually design it in-house is the thought at this point, based on staffing levels to try to save money in that way. But one important thing is if we start the survey now, we could potentially do construction in a year if funds were there to do it. Probably if we wait, another few months, we're looking more at maybe 2022 as a time when we'd be able to get out to construction. So it's just another thing to consider with all this. So the the main purpose of doing this survey would be to improve lighting, be to improve, potentially put shelters in place, signage, maybe some improvements to the road to allow for better movement of the buses. And 25,000 is an estimate. It certainly could be less. We try to be conservative with that. So yeah, that's really on the information on it, but it's it doesn't feel like there could have been a worse time to move forward with what we've been talking about. So I can understand whichever direction council wants to go on this.
Thank you.
I have Laura and then Graham.
I appreciate the information that Eric just shared. Now, I was reading this as this would help us to improve what is viewed as a temporary bus pickup and drop off as we, in the long term, look for a more permanent solution. Am I correct in making that assumption?
Well, I think there's been certainly a lot of ideas around if Seneca Street, when it redevelops, that could potentially be a location. I don't think there's anything, definite at this point. I think the only thing we know right now is that, for the probably next, I would guess at least 2 or 3 years, that there wouldn't be an off-road option like that.
Right. And I would just add that I think the success of the current model, both Green Street and Seneca Street, is because of the work you've done, Eric, and the flexibility of some of the business owners and the library and the bus companies themselves. But you've put in a lot of work to make this arrangement feasible. And yet we are hearing from the public a desire for more permanent bus terminal. So I would hope that this survey could help us in the short term.
Yeah, now you've definitely highlighted another complication of this issue, which is, we see this as continuing for now, and we want it to be good for, we want it to be something that works for people. But ultimately, I think everybody's looking towards something that would be probably in a garage or something like that. So it complicates the decision-making around doing investments in the near term, because of course, we're all looking to, a better potential 5-year solution.
Yeah. Graham next.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Eric. I have a few questions. I guess my first one is on the timing. As we know, there's going to be some construction starting on Green Street. So do we see this as an option during the construction that's going to start in whenever, a year or two?
Yeah, I do think it's fairly localized. I think as far as construction in the street, there certainly wouldn't be very much. And really, it's probably more focused on the area outside of the street, improving that pedestrian area. I don't think if the curb were to move at all, it might move just a little bit. There might be some restriping in the street. But I really do think that the areas that would be mostly affected would not be so affected by other projects.
So question number 2, if I may. So the survey, I'm assuming that the bus schedules have changed a little bit right now. Is that going to affect the input to the survey, or what kinds of things are you going to be looking at for this survey?
Right. No, excellent point. And I should have mentioned that early on. There are no intercity buses running at the moment, which makes this whole situation even more precarious.
Right.
They've all stopped operating as of just a few days ago. Coach was the last one. So yeah, there isn't any current activity right now. Hopefully we would imagine it would come back.
And that's another point that I think we should make sure to touch on is not only has the activity stopped, but so has the permit revenue.
Right.
So we're talking about a revenue stream. The money that Eric just referred to, that $160,000 certainly is there. But what we were receiving recently, I believe, was right around $25,000 a month, in that range total from all the different bus lines. Correct. And that number for the next number of months is going to be approximately 0.
Yeah.
And that may be true for quite some time. What we're hearing from bus companies that are trying to project out even a few months is that they're not running at all right for the next few months, and that after that they expect to run at a radically reduced level compared to what they were doing. So there's a very different revenue stream there.
That's right. And we even had a new provider that was, as you know, Flixbus, that was coming on. They've decided to hold off for now. So that would have been additional revenue, but we don't know the timing of when that would come back.
I just wrap up and say, I mean, given that and what I'm sensing from you, Eric, the kind of lack of urgency of this, I mean, if we had this flexibility with this 160, I know this is all important work, but I'm just thinking maybe this is not the time to commit to spending 25,000 when we're looking to be in an emergency situation, I guess. So that's just my thinking right now.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really understandable. I feel very conflicted on it myself, professionally speaking, because I see some needs there for sure, but it's a unique time. So that's why I just wanted to bring it back to council, to be consistent with what I said before, but I really trust your judgment on this. And I really would accept either way that you decide as being a wise move.
Thank you, Eric.
Donna?
Right, I don't think this is a priority right now. And then I think I wrote down the wrong number. So that the funds collected are 173,000.
163 to date.
I heard it all wrong. Thank you.
Sure.
Any further thoughts? Is there a motion? Maybe we should, we could vote on it, or if there's a motion to table for the time being until or just Donna says, let's just vote. Laura?
I'll move to table this.
I'll second that.
Second by Graham. So this will be tabled indefinitely. It could come back maybe when the picture is a little bit clearer, both the need for a place for the inner city buses to come, as well as our fiscal picture.
Sure, it makes sense. And I think maybe what I can do is continue to monitor, if we get to a point where the buses are back to a large extent, then maybe we have another conversation about it, because I would imagine that won't start to happen for months, at least.
Okay.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, thanks to all of you. You've been great partners in this whole process.
Thank you. Do we still need to vote on that, or the
We do,
motion is
we do.
enough?
No, we should vote. So all those in favor? Any opposed?
Wait, are we voting to table or on the original resolution?
To
Voting
table, I think.
Table it.
I'd rather vote against it, but if this is my only choice, okay.
You can vote against.
You could vote against tabling and then.
What's the point?
So let's do it again. All those in favor of tabling? And that carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, next, Green Street.
5.3 is an ordinance to approve a contingent purchase agreement for the east section of the Green Street Urban Renewal Project site. Whereas Ithaca Properties LLC proposes to purchase property at the eastern section of the Green Street parking garage. Whereas the premise consists of air rights above a privately owned ground floor commercial use, contains 2 elevated public parking decks constructed in 1974. Whereas Ithaca Properties LLC is the owner of a commercial building located at 215 East State Street that extends immediately under, and is thereby connected to the premises. Whereas on June 27th, 2019, the IURA designated Ithaca Properties LLC as a qualified and eligible sponsor to potentially acquire the premises to undertake an urban renewal project. Whereas on December 23rd, 2019, the IURA endorsed a definition for a proposed urban renewal project at the premises that includes reconstruction of 2 public parking decks to be leased back to the city for operation. Whereas the premises is encumbered by a 2014 purchase option held by Hotel Ithaca LLC, the owners of the Downtown Marriott Hotel, to acquire the premises for $1 in the event the city of Ithaca proposes to decommission or convey the premises. Whereas Hotel Ithaca LLC has 12 months from the date of notice to exercise their option. Whereas a structural study of the Green Street parking garage conducted by Stantec revealed that significant structural deficiencies exist in the eastern section that will require a sizable capital investment to address. Whereas the study estimated the cost to the city to demolish the eastern section of more than $2,030,000 in 2019 dollars. Whereas a 2019 appraisal concluded the market value of the premises to be $2,380,000. Whereas the existing structural system supporting the 2 parking decks does not support high-rise development. Whereas the negotiated purchase price of $350,000 represents a reasonable fair market value of the premises after the avoided demolition cost is considered. Whereas on March 26, 2020, Board of Public Works determined the retention of the ownership of the premises is surplus for municipal purposes. Whereas the purchase agreement is contingent on the City of Ithaca Common Council approval of an IRA proposed disposition and development agreement with Ithaca Properties, LLC to implement an urban renewal project. Whereas the city charter requires approval by 3/4 of the Common Council to authorize the sale of the property. Whereas the city charter further requires notice of a proposed sale to be published no less than once each week for 3 weeks. The first such notice being published no less than 30 days prior to the approval vote, and such notices have been published. Now, therefore, be it ordained and enacted by the Common Council of the City of Ithaca as follows, and I'll move as written.
Sorry, second by Steve Smith. Discussion. I don't know if Steph, did you want to kick it off or?
Yeah, sure. I just, as we all probably remember, we tabled this because there were some issues with the two tenants, Home Green Home and Sunny Days. Since that point, the developer has reconfigured his plans and will no longer impact those tenants. So the threat of displacement is no longer exists. So bringing it back now for approval.
Great. Discussion, Dixon.
So I don't know if everyone got a chance to read what Deirdre Kurzweil sent us, but do we have guarantees after, let's say we move ahead with this, that that the plan would continue in this way without affecting the Rothschild building? And also, can we indeed maybe assist the retailers with whatever legal fees they incurred dealing with him in the interim?
And Nels Bones joined us. Nels, thoughts?
Yes, just want to let you know my internet connection is a little unstable, so if I drop out, I'll phone in. But Doc, to that issue, I think the best way to address that is part of the disposition and development agreement. The IRA already had recommended imposing a standard that if there was any displacement, that there would be a need for a mitigation plan. We can keep that requirement in the disposition and development agreement, so it would continue going forward if the plans were to change again. Likewise, the IRA can take a look at the question of out-of-pocket expenses that were incurred as a direct result of the threat of displacement and address that in the disposition development agreement and bring that to the Common Council for your consideration later.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Further questions? Seeing none, are we ready to vote? Okay, all those in favor? Those opposed? Sorry, George, you muted.
Well, I thought we had to do this by roll call.
Oh, is that true? Okay.
We need a 3/4 vote. I don't recall the roll call.
Okay, my mistake. I knew it was 3/4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That needs to be 3.
Need 3/4. Okay. Again, sorry. All those in favor? Those opposed? That carries 9-1 with Alderperson McGonigal opposed.
No, I didn't oppose.
Oh, you didn't oppose.
No.
Did you vote in favor?
I just got my arm up slow.
Okay. Just fair enough. All right. Thank you. Okay. Next up.
So that's it for the agenda. So are we going to talk about the conference center?
Yeah, sorry, I lumped that in as part of PEDC. So Nels and Tom Knipe, the Deputy Director of Economic Development, have joined the call. I've asked them over the last couple of weeks to redo the analysis. They did a good analysis and good stress test that showed us, really, frankly, the conservative estimates for what a conference center would cost, how we think it would work. and we based our vote a month ago on those estimates. A lot has changed, so we asked them to do a new analysis. They did it pretty quickly, but very thoroughly, and we asked them to be here tonight to talk us through what our options are, what the outlook is. Jason Molino has also joined us, the county administrator, is kind enough. Hey, as if he doesn't have enough to do. We're very grateful that he joined us as well to talk this through. So I don't know who wants to kick us off, Nels or Tom, but I'll turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Savante. I'll start off, and I just mentioned also that we have Gary Ferguson and Jennifer Tavares on the line as well. So if there are questions that they would be best suited to answer, they're available in this thing. So Nels and I are going to sort of tag team here, just talk through the approach that we took with this, and I'll start. So basically, obviously, we're expecting a very large decline in hotel room tax revenues this year in 2020, followed by a recovery at some point. We don't really know when that recovery would start. There is some industry intelligence, which I forwarded to you today, that's suggesting that we could begin a recovery in the industry starting in the fourth quarter of this year, going through next year. They're projecting a strong recovery when that recovery begins to occur. We took another look, obviously, at room tax revenues. This project, as you know, is part of the structure is that we would have saved up in a final reserve an amount to protect the city against any call in the general fund. And our position as the guarantor on the lease. That amount was going to be 1.25 million, and so we took another look at the revenues, and the scenarios we looked at included one where we dropped the projected amount for 2 years in the pre-opening collection years of 2021 and 2022 by 7%. We looked at a second scenario where we dropped those revenues by 7% and assumed a drop in supply, the loss of, say, a 100-room hotel. We then developed a third scenario that looked at a deeper hit of 15%. And in that scenario is also built in the loss of a 100-room hotel. And then a fourth scenario is a sort of a variation on scenario 3 that assumes some amount of additional amount going into the reserve from another source during the pre-collection period, which we can speak a little bit about. And those ideas for numbers are really based on sort of that industry intelligence, but also what happened the last time we had a big recession. That was in, of course, 2009, 2010. And the room tax dropped by a level of 7% at that time. As I said, we're expecting a much deeper hit this year, but that doesn't directly impact the conference center project because our assumptions, our project is built on starting collections in January of 2021. So that was why we really started with that year. The 15% is double that, and we also wanted to model a scenario that showed, how bad would it have to get under the assumptions we created for there to be a hit on the general fund. So Nels is going to speak a little bit to sort of what the results and the outcomes of the risk analysis were with those new room tax assumptions.
Okay, thanks, Tom. The analysis shows with the assumptions we use that Tom just described, which are building on the pessimistic case from Hunden's analysis or recommendations for what a pessimistic case would be, which was 20% reduced from his most likely case in terms of revenues and an increase of 9% in operating expenses. So now we're layering on additional stresses on that analysis. The first one is we're adding pre-opening costs of $250,000, which was not considered in our first analysis, which we now know is going to be an expense we're going to have to fund. and then those reductions in the hotel tax revenues. So under scenario 1 of just a 7% reduction starting in 2021 and continuing in 2022 before picking up at a 2% interest rate, the system of reserves withstands that without any problem. There wouldn't be a call on the city funds, nor even touching the final reserve under that scenario in our analysis. If you add the loss of a 100-room hotel and a 7% reduction, we still don't have any, we don't exhaust the final reserve for the city. When you get to the reduction of 15%, now you've triggered an impact on exhausting the final reserve. And that would occur in year 6 in that scenario. And it would require about a $200,000 investment from the general fund to cover that deficiency in the process. So we found that the flex point is somewhere between, probably somewhere around 13 or 14% reduction for 2 years before it starts picking up with growth in the hotel revenues to bring us back up to where we have sufficient revenues to cover the debt service, well, the rent, which is a debt service payment essentially, as well as the operating deficit in the facility itself. So essentially the program is structured to provide for a moderate recession, including closing of a hotel under the current structure. But if we get a deep recession that lasts too long, it would start to impact and exhaust the reserves. The good news about that analysis is that the call on the city funds would decrease over time as tax revenues generally pick up and increase year to year, whereas the debt service is stable for 30 years. So we have a stable debt service like your house loan, but we have projected increases and have had a history of increases in hotel revenue collections. So that's kind of what the stress test is telling us. We also, Tom and I have talked about some strategies to address that additional risk that we can go into if you'd like to explore those ideas as well.
Yeah, if we start to see, just to very briefly touch on it, if I may, if we start to see something closer to scenario 3 or worse, there's certainly a lot of uncertainty out there about when we're going to start to see that recovery. What would we start to look at to fill gaps? And I think there are some options that we would look at. They would include ideas like putting less of the pre-opening collections directly into the construction budget and borrowing more. We actually know now that if we were to borrow that money today, we would borrow it a lot cheaper. So that might be a good strategy to look at. Another strategy might be to use something like the TID, but just for a very short period to boost those revenues in addition to the room tax. We also know from our previous research that if we use a benefit assessment district approach, we were able to collect on those stays that would otherwise be tax exempt. Those represent about 25% of the stays under the room tax approach. So that, if later this year things are looking like they're not as positive or not as bad, less worse, there you go, less worse than worse than we thought, then that would be an approach we could look at. And just in closing the presentation piece, I want to remind folks, that we did make a lot of pessimistic assumptions with this. Revenues down, costs up, slower growth, no induced growth, no Airbnb collections, higher cost of borrowing, slow rebound. And so, one model we didn't do was what's the most likely outcome. Of course, we tried to do that with our initial modeling, which was the base case that you saw, but certainly these are new times. And I think we can expect to see less revenues coming in those early years than were initially modeled. But I think we would also expect to see that it's very unlikely that every negative assumption would come true. and we have built in a lot of negative assumptions into the analysis. I just want to also say that the leaders of the conference center project that have been helping push this forward have sort of begun to articulate a mission statement for the conference center that it really could be a project that could help lead the recovery out of this crisis that we're facing right now, and ensure that we have a vibrant downtown. Certainly, we know the image of a downtown is very important to the image of the overall community and the health of our economy and the health of our community. And you know, this would come online in 2023, and hopefully support a really robust recovery.
Yeah, I'll add that, you know, I actually called the meeting together a couple weeks ago because I had gone from bullish to bearish on the conference center. I was a big supporter of it a month ago, and I am as worried about the economy as anybody. I actually think in many, I'm more worried about the state of the national economy than most people I'm talking to, and I feel like I'm trying to grab every lapel I can from 6 feet away and say, you got to do more. You have to invest more in this economy to keep it afloat, because I really am worried. And for that reason, I was thinking we should pull back. This analysis has given me a bit more confidence, seeing a stress test that really assumes catastrophically low levels of rooms taxes and 100 rooms going offline, and still is not assuming any revenue from Airbnb, which I don't think is unrealistic, and still showing that it's workable. That one gives me some confidence. Two, the time frame gives me confidence. Would we want to open a conference center today? Absolutely not. It wouldn't. Of course not. If we were going to do a ribbon cutting on the conference center in July of 2020, it'd be terrible. I think in 2021, it would still be too early. I think we're going to be recovering in 2021. 2022, I would feel a little bit better about, but I actually think 2023 is the exact right time. I think that is the time when we will need to be leading a recovery that increases our revenues, right? Because there's two ways out of a budget problem. It's lower your spending or increase your revenues. And we don't have a lot of tools to increase our revenue, but this is a real demand driver, which I think will be very valuable in that time frame. And then the third thing that gives me confidence is knowing that increased stimulus is coming, both from the state and the federal level, and remembering our experience a decade ago when the Obama stimulus package passed, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or ARRA, passed. They were desperate to push money into shovel-ready projects and found that there weren't many. It was very hard to find something that's actually shovel-ready. I think this is an investment that if we keep it alive, if we move forward, we will be able to attract the attention of the state and federal government to the tune of millions of dollars to support it, especially if it is running under budget and we want to prime the economy. This will be the kind of thing they'll want to push money into. And again, all the same reasons to support it in the first place stand, which is that our economy has been built up too heavily reliant on one pillar, and that's higher education. And diversifying, the more we can diversify the pillars that create jobs and bring in outside dollars, the stronger and more resilient we will be to shocks, the shocks that come in the future. And I've just heard from bartender, I shouldn't say every bartender downtown because I haven't met every bartender downtown, but I've met, I would say 70% of them. And every server, you know, who's trying to support their family and trying to make the rent, they really need to see an investment like this. So I still support it. I think it is certainly riskier. Everything's riskier in this environment. But for those three reasons, one is that the stress tests show that this is viable. It's still under even extremely harsh conditions. Two, I think the timing will be right to open this in 2023. Three, because this can attract state and federal dollars more than the $5 million it's already attracted. And then four, because we really do need to diversify our economy so that it's more resilient to shocks like this. Jason, I don't know if I know this came up at the legislature a couple nights ago. I don't know if you have other thoughts or want to add.
No, I don't think I have anything to add other than the legislature, passed the resolution. I don't remember. It was in March. It was the 17th. I think it was a Tuesday, the 17th, to agree to the 4% contribution of gross receipts of the room tax. That hasn't changed. The conversation hasn't come back up, although we haven't had a legislative meeting, and I've not heard anything different from any legislators that would change. So as far as I understand to date, that they would continue to move forward with that agreement and fulfill that obligation.
Any thoughts? Seth, and then George, and then Graham.
I had a question. I guess maybe this is for Tom, or if Gary's still on the line. I mean, do we know what the status of the $5 million grant is? Because I admit to being somewhat worried about that. I mean, with the state being in such terrible financial shape, is there a risk of that money being repurposed to balance the state budget? Has there been any conversations with, I guess it would be ESD, about the grant and whether it's still there and they're still committed to the project?
Yes, as far as we know, the grant is still there. The actual applicant was the Chamber of Commerce Foundation. Jennifer Tavares is on the call, and invite her to add anything if she has anything specific to add. But yes, the grant was awarded, and as far as we know, it's still in place.
Yeah, we spoke with several Empire State Development contacts just a few weeks ago. At that point, there was certainly no indication that we had any concerns related to the grant funding. Obviously, we became aware a few days ago about this conversation. And so I'm happy to check in with them again in the next day or two. See if there's anything different about our status, but there's no reason why we would think there was.
Yeah, I've spoken to officials in the state and a couple folks in the federal level, including Senator Schumer's office, and everybody reiterated the same, which was this is exactly the kind of project that we're going to want to invest in the years to come. They couldn't make any promises or assurances, but they all said, yeah, this is the kind of thing we that would get funded in the Recovery Act. I had George, and then, sorry, Jennifer, did I see your hand go up or no? Oh, yes, George, then Graham.
Am I on now?
Yeah.
I just had a couple questions for Nels. I was unclear what you meant, Nels, when you said there's a $250,000 at the beginning that we can't count on now. I think, am I understanding that right? Could you explain that for me, please?
Right. When we did the original modeling, we weren't aware that there was going to be a need for a $250,000 pre-opening expenses when you bring on the management operator and prepare for the project. So that wasn't built into our original pro forma. So we added that into the stress test. So the good news is that even with including that extra upfront expense, the model still works for that moderate recession with a loss of 100 rooms. So we've built that in as an extra stressor on the budget.
So does that $250,000 come from the bonding, or does that come out of our city budget?
It wouldn't come out of the city budget. It would be coming out of the project. It would have the effect of reducing the upfront balance available for the final reserve, though. If you think about it, that money's got to come from somewhere, but it wouldn't. That's not a draw on the city's general fund. No.
Okay. So my second question is, I'm very impressed with all the downtown businesses and people like Spike, who are really eager to have this happen and think it's very important. I'm extremely protective of the city taxpayers, and we are the last line. And in these times, I'm worried about getting to that back line of defense. And I'm wondering if the hotels or anyone else is expressed any willingness to increase their part of this backstop.
I don't think we've approached them with that specific question. I think they're all reeling from the issues of COVID-19 at the short term, and we've probably exhausted that during the prior discussion to some degree. We do have some ideas of how to address and protect the taxpayer if you want to explore some different approaches, but that's if you think there's too much risk with the project as structured currently.
I'd like to hear those. We don't have to hear them right this second, but I would definitely like to hear those.
Yeah, no, yeah. Why don't you pitch the idea? Because I think it's a good one worth considering. And then maybe we should also talk about timeline. If we wanted to amend the project, do we have to do it tonight? Especially if it were to include like a betterment fee, is that something we could do next month or a few months down the road?
Okay, great. Yeah. So Tom and I were talking about 3 different approaches to strategies to reduce the risk to the taxpayer. One, we've talked about the main way to raise revenue from the hospitality sector has been either a hotel tax, occupancy room tax, or a TID, a tourism improvement district. Where we're having questions now about whether the hotel revenues are going to meet projections, we could be assured that we would hit our target if it was a TID. So one option is to establish a TID and not focus on the hotel tax. We could say we need to raise $1.9 million a year, which was the projected amount with hotel taxes, and just do that through a betterment assessment district called a TID, and assure ourselves that we're going to get that amount of money through assessing property owners who benefit from the project. As Tom pointed out to me, that would also increase revenues because that would also include tax exempt customers rather than just taxable customers. So one option is to focus on the TID rather than the hotel tax as a revenue source. It has some downsides that Ari has identified previously in terms of having to override the tax cap, and it probably requires more administrative effort and an annual vote of the Common Council, but it does provide some benefits. So that's option number 1, go with the TID. Option number 2 is to look at the hotel tax and the TID together, both. If we have a shortfall of hotel taxes, we could, at the city level, have a TID that rides on top, layers on top of that, and makes up for any difference or any shortfall in the projected hotel taxes. So for example, if we were expecting $1.9 million in hotel taxes revenues and we received 1.7 for 2 years in a row, we'd have a shortfall of $400,000, and that could be made up for by establishing a TID to collect the $400,000 shortfall. That's got some pros and cons as well, of course. And one is that we would be looking for their very same people to raise the TID money from, who are suffering by not raising enough hotel taxes or having enough visitors downtown. But it would protect the taxpayer and provide that option that we could have a contingent TID in the event of a shortfall. The city could adopt a tourism improvement district to make up for the difference in the shortfall. And
you asked about timing, so let me just add that
okay.
We aren't thinking about that as a permanent. That's really just to seed the reserves up to the level that we would like them to be at.
Right, and the idea with that also in a timing perspective is we could wait to see what the collections are in 21 and most of 22, and come fall of 22, we would see exactly where our collections are, and the council could make a decision at that point whether it's appropriate to add a TID, or maybe there's some other revenue sources that are coming in that we didn't really model well. For example, the Airbnb, or there's some other savings we find in the project or other funding sources. So that could be a decision that could be deferred until that time period. The final idea is to increase the initial capitalization of the final reserve. As it's currently projected, we're trying to fund that reserve through pre-opening hotel tax revenues. We could also build $1 million or something like that amount into the development budget. It would have the effect of increasing the annual rent because it would be part of the debt service payment, but it would also build a bigger cushion in that reserve. So that's got some, you know, that would be probably best viewed if we knew that the interest rate was going to be very low, because it would make more, you know, it's borrowed money for 30 years essentially, but it would also build the cushion up and provide more time before the city general fund would be tapped in a bad scenario. So those three options are focus on the TID as an alternative way to raise funds, which probably has to be made relatively early in the process, certainly by January of 2021. Secondly would be to have the hotel tax combined with the TID to make up for any shortfalls. And the third idea is to increase the initial capitalization of the final reserve to protect against a worst case scenario.
And thank you, Nels. This is Ari. I appreciate those options. I do once again want to advise, as I have before, that the special benefit assessment model, which is what we're calling a TID, should really be a backup option and not the main option. It does come with, it will be the first time in New York State that this will have been done on this basis anywhere in the state. There's nothing clearly in state law to definitively authorize it, and it comes with additional risk that I think should be used as a backup. So I think the idea of waiting and seeing how the revenues work out and then potentially implementing a TID as a rider on top of the room tax, if needed, is an interesting option, but I do urge council to continue to focus on a room tax as the primary funding vehicle.
Yeah,
I agree. But
follow-up question. If the projections don't happen, and say in 4 or 5 years,
I'm sorry, George. Sorry, George. We lost like the last 6 seconds of what you said.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I'm just wondering if at some point we get to the general fund and we have to pay in to support this project for a period of time, and then as the economy gets stronger and the conference center makes more money, is there in this whole complex arrangement, is there a way to pay the general fund back in the good years that follow? Does that make any sense?
It does make sense. Yeah, and it's a good question. Maybe Nels or Tom are better to answer it. I guess I always viewed the payback of this investment is, of course, the increased sales tax revenue and the associated spin-off revenue that we get from all those new people visiting the community and the room nights. But that's an interesting question, like an actual getting like a stake in the conference center if we have to pay out of the general fund. Any thoughts, Ari, Nels, Tom, Jennifer? Have you seen anything like this? Jason?
So I guess I would just say, I think it'd be good to just remember all of the other separate reserve funds that are slated to be built up in the project budget. And remembering that if for some reason we ever got down to the city having to pay a portion out of not its general fund, but the room tax monies that have been collected, we would first have likely exhausted a few of these other reserve accounts, or at least partially exhausted them, right? So an absolute priority would have to be recapitalizing the reserve funds, or rebalancing them, I think. I think certainly if it got down to that, and I just want to remember, I want us to remember how many millions of extra dollars we're talking about. likely before that were to happen, and the additional 200,000 that would be coming from other sources in every single operating year prior to anything coming from the city's dedicated lodging stream of income funded tax source. So again, I mean, I understand all the justifications for playing worst case scenarios, but I think I'm sure that folks would be willing to look at, you know, if we had like a couple of really awful years and then we're able to recapitalize the reserve funds and then there was extra and things were going really well, paying the city back or reimbursing that fund as well could make sense. But that fund is going to have a revenue source that will recapitalize it annually anyway. So I would assume it's up for discussion, but I just want us all to remember how those different components are planned to work. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I had George, I'm sorry, we went down that rabbit hole and I've had Graham here on hold for quite a while. Sorry, Graham, you next and then Duxon.
That's fine, thanks. So let me just go back to the original conversation about the grant. So if the 5 million grant, I mean, we've had the reassurances and this is a great project, but the state is going to be in serious financial trouble after this in the best case scenario. So if the grant isn't there, then the project doesn't go forward. Is that my understanding? Okay, thank you. So I think you already addressed this. I mean, one of my concerns, as you know, in the previous discussion and in fact in the vote, I was a reluctant supporter, and it was largely based on the stress analysis that you provided, Nels and Tom. So I really appreciate your work on this, and also the prospect of diversifying the local economy. But I did have this question, and I sent that round by email about if we didn't reach that reserve, you know, what those options would be. And Nels, you've outlined some of those. My main concern going forward is, you know, even in the best years, we struggle with the budget. Every year we struggle with the budget in terms of, you know, the property taxes. We've just seen the assessments go up. So I really regard tapping into the general fund as almost not an option for us. So I'm glad to hear, Nels, that there are these other options available. I certainly take Ari's comment about the TID, but it's certainly reassuring to hear that you could consider some combination, because I really think my main concern is I don't want to be tapping the general fund for this project. It would have to be very serious for me to get into that position, just because, you know, as I say, I think each year we struggle to, you know, get property taxes down to a level that people can afford to be here. So I look forward to exploring some of those other options, because that was my main concern. Is I know, Jennifer, you say you've got all these reserves, but you know, I don't want the city taxpayers to be on the hook. I don't know what my confidence level is, but you know, I really want to try and, as you said, Nels, build up as many barriers or defenses there with options. And I like that idea of maybe a combination of the room tax, which I'm going to bet is going to go up and down. It's certainly going to go down now, but it, you know, I still think that in the next few years it's going to be uncertain. So I like the idea of having some kind of combination of that and a kind of backup through a TID.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's well said, Graham, and I agree. I like the idea of having a backup, and I mean, like Ari, I agree that it should be a backup, not the main revenue source, but knowing that we can trigger it, especially if the rounds of stimulus for some reason don't come through. That is part of also why I feel more comfortable moving forward right now. I had Duxon and then Seth.
So I have two questions. I did not watch the planning board meeting yesterday, but Joanne was saying that Vecino's really excited about moving forward. And after the legislature's vote on the 17th, they took that, like all the partners were on board. And so we're going to go full steam ahead with the conference center and invested their time and design energy into that path. So I guess so one question is, what does anyone know, how far they've gotten and what a burden it would be on their project to change course this late? And then another question was, do we have a fourth option, another option, I forget what number we're on, but an option of shutting down the conference center in future years and repurposing it? And what kind of thought has been given to its potential repurposing?
I can address the Vecino question a little bit. Vecino is very committed to the project now. They understood that the county legislator vote was the last vote to commit to the conference center. And as you mentioned, they've hired a design consultant who specializes in conference centers and has been working with the stakeholder group. They've also worked to address the foundation issues and structural issues for the project. What's driving Vecino is the deadline for submitting their project for affordable housing financing in December. And to get there, they have to go through the site plan approval process, environmental review, secure financing, document the exact construction costs, and they feel that they have no time to lose to get through all those hoops basically in November so they can get a closing in December. So what's their primary concern is to define the project and execute that process. They, so I guess I want to just urge you to think that if there's going to be a change in the decision from the prior vote, we need to inform Vecino as soon as possible because they're incurring costs. And if we wait too long, it could imperil the actual affordable housing component project as well. But they have been very committed and working in partnership with us, and they will be looking for opportunities to save costs. But we can't expect there'll be cost savings on this large development project. It's a complicated project, and we want to make sure it's the very best project as well. So we don't want to do too much value engineering unless absolutely necessary. And I have the second question you had about repurposing is not a good outcome, not a good solution for us. If we have to go to that place, it's going to require new investment in the project because a conference center is a purpose-built building and it doesn't lend itself to a lot of other uses. So there would be a need for investment in that. And I would think the important thing would be to monitor the economic performance year to year. And if we think it's not going to turn around, we need to make the decision while there's still funding in the reserves to help accomplish that change. So it really requires some vigilance to watch it and not wait till it's hit bottom and make that in a change while there's still some reserves available to help subsidize that change.
And Ari can confirm this, but I believe we modified the request to the state for this enabling legislation for the room tax to allow for funds to be used for the repurposing of a conference center, just to make sure that should that unfortunate eventuality arrive, that we have that option.
Nice. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I see Gary.
Yeah. I just wanted to add that as we're putting together the structure for how this would be governed, there would be an operating board that the city and all the partners and the industry and would all have seats on, but there would be a separate carve out where there would be a fiscal oversight group. What the city would actually have majority control over. And that fiscal oversight group, I call it a fiscal oversight board, has some reserve powers in this project. At least as we're thinking about it now, that would oversee and help regulate how these reserves get tapped and when they get tapped and at what speed and what happens. So I think we're very cognizant of the fact that we don't want to get to the point where there would be taxpayer money going into this project. And I think the whole idea behind some of these alternatives we're thinking about are to find ways to make sure that never happens. But you would have you would actually through the operations that we're trying to put together, you would have some control over how that would happen.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. So I do want to, I'll see if there's, oh, I'm sorry, I have Seth, and then I'll see if there's more discussion before, while we have Jason with us. It would be great if there's any COVID-19 questions about the health response, the economic response. Jason's been doing a great job leading the county and with Frank Krupa, the health department, through this tough time. So I don't want to rush us through this conversation, but I do want to get to let you ask questions of Jason about that. So I'll go to Seth, and then we'll see if there's anybody else who wants to talk about the conference center.
So my question was actually Duxton's second question. I wanted to ask a question just about repurposing plans. So that's all set.
And Svante?
Yep.
If I can, just very briefly, to a little bit of the earlier conversation on this subject, I just wanted to note two things, and I think particularly to Graham's points earlier. One is Graham was saying that he would very much want to avoid a draw on the general fund, with which I wholeheartedly agree. I do believe that while there are various defense mechanisms, so to speak, that we've been discussing this evening that might help mitigate that, if it gets to the point that that's happening, I believe only a last-minute implementation of a TID-style additional fee at that juncture would be the likely defense if it were available, so to speak. I don't think the other things can be done at the last minute. They're more long-term, I believe. And then the other, as a result, that I wanted to point out is that we talked about the idea that if room tax revenues were declining, that TID revenues might come on top. That's true, but I think my question for Nels or Tom would be, aren't the TID revenues also going to be declining? Aren't they fully correlated? So TID revenues and room tax revenues should decline at the same time, albeit you can add them up to more if you put the TID on top of the room tax. Is that right, Tom or Nels?
I think that's right, Ari, that there would be, if we had lower hotel revenues, it would by definition mean that the hotels were not selling as many rooms at the same price. Yeah. However, the TID could be established that would include more than just the hotels. It could expand to others who are benefiting, other property owners who are benefiting from the conference center. But you're right, that could be a hardship on some properties who are already struggling, and that is a concern with that option.
Not an ideal scenario in terms of competitiveness either. Basically, you're creating a scenario where you have an 18% tax on stays here, which is fairly high. You add an additional percent on that, do people begin to think about alternate locations, substitutes, et cetera? So it's not a great option for that reason as well. I think in the initial analysis that we presented, we were thinking about it as a very short-term measure to build up a reserve to increase the city's cushion, not as an ongoing long-term measure to have them together.
Okay, it's good. Any other questions? I'll say when you say competition, I was thinking in my head Saratoga, like Seinfeld saying Newman. That's my Saratoga is my Newman. Other discussions? Am I getting punchy already? It's only 9.
Already? What do you mean?
I know. Well, okay. Well, thanks. Thanks everybody here. So we will keep you in the loop. This project team is still working, obviously, and we're working to try and get as much state and federal money as we can. So we will keep you in the loop as it continues, especially if we feel the need to pursue a TID alongside the current hotel rooms tax. But please also let me know how you're thinking and how you're feeling, and if you want a brainstorming session with the staff who's working on this, we can arrange that too. So now I want to thank Jason and mention that the county has done a few of these great sessions for elected officials. I know many of you on council joined last Saturday. Can I actually ask, so they're doing another one tomorrow morning. Nels and I will be at the IURA. Well, we'll be exactly where we are right now. We'll be sitting in our chairs, but I have to lead the Ithaca Urban Renewal Agency meeting at 8:30 in the morning. Is there anybody who could represent the city? I'm looking at Deb and Seth first. Deb's hands up. Great. At 8:30 on the call tomorrow. Much appreciated. So if you have questions that you'd like asked and answered, you can send those to Deb before 8:30 tomorrow. And I just forwarded around the call-in information for everybody. But are there any questions for Jason now while we have him?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Declan.
I heard today from our TCAS general manager that there have been meetings about other transportation options to take people, say, from downtown. I actually had a constituent write and say she has no car. So, and because we've necessarily had to cut TCAT service, and there's less or no Uber Lyft service right now too. Is there anything more you can say about using Gadabout or other ways to bring people to the testing sites?
Yeah, no, that's a good question that we've had, and thank you again for the opportunity. I'd be happy to answer any questions about the COVID-19 response. So the transportation question has been something that we've been working on with some partners over the past few days. As you know, last Tuesday, we opened, CMC opened the drive-through testing site. The transportation question came up then as to how do we best address it. And for the time being, when a response like this happens, the first thing we need to do is to be able to get an initial response in place and then start to work on the details of the smaller issues that come up from that. And this is one of them, particularly what about folks that don't have transportation means. We're not encouraging that they take public transit out of the risk that you could expose more people on the public transit, on the bus there. So what we've been able to work with TCAT, Gadabout, Car Share, is to have a conversation about possibly outfitting a car. Car Share may volunteer a car to be outfitted and where it can be, you can have a protection barrier between the rear seat and the front seat. Have a volunteer then go and pick up the individual. The individual will then go through the drive-through, have the test taken, the individual will be brought back to their residence. And then we would bring the vehicle over to TCAT and they would sanitize it prior to the next pickup so that there isn't any cross-contamination. That is probably the best way to be able to transport folks without transportation means. Primarily, one of the biggest challenges we run into is burning through PPE in between each situation if we were to do that differently. So how do we minimize the use of personal protective equipment? Because as you know, the nation globally, we're going through a shortage, and the first set of generally PPE is preserved for healthcare workers and first responders. So how do we minimize the use of that? Creating a barrier that might be able to do that is what they're working on now. For situations where folks may have mobility challenges in general, where we're trying to work out an arrangement where maybe a Gadabout bus can be used, but a similar situation where we'd be able to create a barrier and then be able to sanitize the vehicle before the next pickup. So that's, I think we're hopeful that by next week we'll have something in place to be able to do that. We have the drive-through facility has accepted walk-ins. And while we definitely are not encouraging it, there have been one or two that have taken the bus, but we don't encourage that, and we provide them with a mask as they leave so that there is a minimizing contamination, or we'll try to find another way for them to get home. But that's right now what's in the works, and I think it'll work out well. We have not seen a huge demand for it, but we know that it exists. So this option will hopefully be able to address any of those issues. I should also say that if people in the meantime are symptomatic, the direction we've been giving is if they're symptomatic, contact a primary care provider or contact urgent care, isolate themselves in their dwelling from their housemates. And then essentially that's the same treatment as you would be treating if you had a positive test or pending results of a test. So still treat it the same way, just you wouldn't have test results. And obviously if there's anyone that's in distress or has an immediate healthcare need, that's when you would dial 911 for immediate medical assistance. So that's in the works, and I suspect by next week we'll have something up and running.
Thank you. Great. Thank you. Cynthia and then Graham.
Just to follow up on that, if the demand is not high, have you considered just sending a health aide to a person's home?
Yeah, this is the issue of PPE, because the person taking the sample has to be in personal protective equipment. And then there's an issue of them taking samples, keeping track of the samples, documenting the samples, and then being able to bring the samples back to be distributed or sent out to a lab. So it's one of the other options, and they're not great options. So we're trying to identify what's the way of burning through the least amount of PPE, but still keeping the sampling intact at the drive-through may add more benefit than trying to take the sampling around from location to location. Obviously, if neither of them work and that's the only option available for whatever the circumstances, then that's a judgment call that'll have to be made at that time. But those are kind of the two things that have been weighed out when we're trying to do you bring sampling to the individual, or do you try to bring the individual to the sampling?
I had Graham and then Laura.
Joel, yeah, I've had a couple of emails and phone calls about what kind of local priorities are for people, you know, in terms of, I know people are making masks, making donations, going to blood drives and stuff. Is there any sense of what the real kind of, there's so many things that people are doing. Do you have a sense of the priorities for the county?
There's a lot of priorities, and sometimes those priorities shift based on the day. And that's been one of the challenges with all this. We're working, the testing was a priority last year, working with CMC, getting the testing up and running, and it's been successful. Continuing to communicate with quarantined individuals or individuals that are in isolation, folks that have tested positive is important. We've had a lot of support through volunteers, nurses that are paramedical staff that are volunteering that can help out. That's been a great asset. We're working with food providers to ensure food's available, and I think that'll continue to develop in the upcoming weeks. One of the things we're trying to understand, which we don't know, is will we see cases go increase drastically in the next week or two? Will it not? Will it stay where it's at? And that combined with the possibility of more folks becoming unemployed, less paychecks, is there going to be an increased demand on food needs? So a lot of this stays fluid. A lot of the issues we're aware of, and we are working closely with our nonprofit and our human service agencies and partners, because they're providing a lot of the service directly. For example, childcare needs and ensuring that first responders and healthcare providers had childcare was a big step. It was a big push early on last week or the week before, when we all had to narrow down our non-essentials had to close, and a lot of businesses and employees had to go home. So right now, I don't know that I can say there's one arching priority. Obviously, PPE is a big priority, but there's nothing we can do about that. We can't, there are some efforts to make it locally, which is definitely helpful, but the large scale that we're burning through it, and the healthcare facilities are burning through it, and first responders need it, is a concern, but it's out of our hands. So I don't really have a great answer for you, other than there are a lot of balls in the air at one time. Sometimes, depending on the day, the priority may shift. But I can say the collaboration with the community, the collaboration with the human service agencies, nonprofit agencies, collaboration with other municipalities has been overwhelming and great. Collaboration from higher ed. Cornell has been able to donate and provide quite a bit of additional PPE that's been redistributed. So you've seen a really outpour of support when those issues come up for prioritization. The federal stimulus and how that's rolled out and implemented, I think, will also shift priorities based on economic recovery. So I don't have anything to say, this is a one priority over another, and depending on the day, it could shift.
Thanks, Joel.
That's good. Laura?
Yeah, thanks, Joel. Last week, some people who were tested were given a range of 4 to 7 days for getting their test results. As we see an increase in testing, I wanted to ask where our samples are being sent and what is the range of time frame for people getting the results of their test.
So this is a question that has evolved, and the answer has evolved over time from the initial testing, when testing started, several weeks ago. And the original Craft Road drive-through site that was almost, I think, 2.5 weeks ago, used a different lab. And at that time, the first lab that was used had a much longer response, anywhere between 4 to 7 days in certain instances, maybe even a day or two longer. Last week, I believe the lab was changed, and we're starting to see something between a 1 to 3 day response. So right now we're starting to see the turnaround much, and we now have several days of that turnaround under our belt. So that wait time is nowhere near what it was when it was originally started. And that's partially just due to when testing ramped up all at once, there was a huge influx of tests. There was minimal labs that could do it. So therefore wait times were longer. And now that more labs have come on, they're getting better at the process. Wait times are down to a day or day to 3 days.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity. say that, probably I'm in contact with Dan Cogan once a day or so. We just regularly issues. I know Chief Parsons has reached out multiple times, as well as other city staff. They've been wonderful to work with, and it's a great partnership. So we appreciate the collaboration as we all deal with this in different ways.
Yeah, thank you very much. We appreciate how much you've involved us as a partner, and I really just admiring from afar how well you're doing, juggling what frankly nobody's ever seen before. So really kudos. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thanks, Jason.
The times
Give
are
Frank
fine.
our regards too.
Will do. Will do.
Thanks, Jason. Sorry for the Joel.
That's all right. You can call me.
Sorry, Jason. Too many. I just texted too many meetings with
Too many
people at
meetings, too
Cornell.
many Joels and Jasons.
It's okay. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, you too.
Have a good one.
All right, so we'll go now to appointments. Would anyone like to move the appointments? Moved by Seth, seconded by Stephen. I'm sorry. Does anybody want to add the new planning board member, or does everyone feel more comfortable waiting until next month? Yeah, so Seth would move to the appointments to include Elizabetta, I think is how to say that.
Yeah.
Seconded by Steve, George. Oh, George, were you seconding or for
Yes.
discussion? Oh, seconded. Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Sorry, I just have to laugh at that Dachshund and stuff looking over.
Oh.
Yeah. I miss my partner.
Oh, that's so sweet.
It does seem like, yeah, it does seem like, it seems here like he's supervising you.
Yeah, I'm staring at the back of your head very intently.
Yeah, that might be for the best that we keep you supervised. Okay. All right. Reports of council liaisons. Any reports? Yes, Laura.
Yeah, I was just going to report that we got an email from TCAT, from the general manager today, Scott, and he reported there are no TCAT employees who have tested positive, which is very good news, given that they're still out there on the road. And then the one other thing I wanted to report was the IURA. You referenced this, Savante, the public hearings on the HUD entitlement grant programs. There was a public hearing last Thursday, March 22nd, rather, and a second public hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. And those public hearings, there will be agency organization representatives coming to talk about their proposals, their grant applications. The city has been awarded, the IURA has been awarded $682,000 of CDBG grant money and $335,000 of home investment partnership funds. I don't know, Savante, if you wanted to add anything to those figures.
No, only that the figures are fine. Our concern has been, well, I say fine relatively speaking. Our concern always with those HUD dollars is that they would take a drastic cut under the Trump administration. Truth is that Congress has done a very good job protecting. There's been a bipartisan coalition that's protected them. The Trump administration tries to zero them out every year, and they get added back more or less around the levels they were. Now, that said, in an ideal world, we would get 4 times that funding because we see about 7 times that number of requests. So it should be okay. But we are also hearing that the next round of stimulus, that HUD just barely missed out on being included in this past round, and that it's likely to be included in the next round so that we can jumpstart the building of housing and affordable housing, et cetera. So we'll knock on wood.
Yeah, and I'll just add that these grants, this money supports some of the most vulnerable in our community. So it supports rent deposit assistance, it supports small repair so that people are able to stay in their homes. It supports the programs of the most vulnerable in our population.
Sorry, any other council reports? George? Sorry, you're muted now. Still muted. There
How
you
about
go.
now? Now?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. Just a reminder that today is considered Census Day. So everybody should fill out their census, and I'll ask my colleagues to please remind their constituents that they need to fill out their census so that we get 6 or 7 more congressmen in the state of New York.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think we're going the other way.
Yeah,
but
I think so.
It's important to be counted. Rob?
Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone else besides those of us on the Cornell City Working Group get this, but the Cornell Community Relations Office is holding weekly office hours on Thursdays from 9 to 9:30 a.m. And I'm happy to forward those to you all if you're interested in attending the Zoom conference.
Great. 9 to 9:30. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Is a report of city? Oh, yes, Dr.
All right, real quick. So it's not really an official liaison, but like JR was, I'm on the board of the United Way. And thank you, Mayor, for using your platform to raise money for them over your birthday. So they and the Community Foundation are have these funds for COVID relief. And so I know we talked earlier about resources, like speaking of resources for the most vulnerable, they are collecting money. So if you do have excess stimulus checks or just, anything you can afford to give, these funds could really use it. There's also multiple mutual aid groups on Facebook identifying need and matching them to the people who have them. Anything from like Beach Tree, the healthcare area in Southside, they need laptops and tablets because the old folks there use them and they're sharing them. They're sharing like 2 computers or something to communicate with their loved ones. And so, if you have stuff in your drawers that you're not using, there's a lot of different need out there.
Yeah. Thank you. Deb?
Just really quick, when we're talking about community resources, Human Services Coalition has established, there's some people on the 211 line that are very good at helping people navigate all of these different new possibilities for support. I know several local nonprofits have put specific pots of money and resources aside for people who have been hit in whatever particular way from this. So it's very confusing to figure that out on your own. So calling 211 is really a good place to start. They have taken all of their operations remotely and they're still managing to function and host that service for both Tompkins and Cortland counties. But it's a great place to start if you are confused at resources.
Good. Okay. Thank you. As report of city clerk?
No, I have no report.
Report of city attorney.
Just to say that as we've been discussing, it's a very, very challenging time, and also legally so in terms of navigating all of the new laws that are coming into effect to attempt to mitigate the crisis. So we are looking at full capacity, navigating that new context for the city.
Yeah, quite a lot. I should say, you should see behind the scenes. I mean, quick, fast, creating an MOU that all the bargaining units agreed to provide paid leave for our employees, provide furloughs, and on top of that, interpreting the orders which seem to come from the governor's office every single day, and figuring out how we can continue to conduct the city's business remotely, which again, 1 month ago seemed unnecessary and impossible, and Ari and his staff have put it together, I think pretty well.
Thanks, Ari.
Say that, and while we have Julie here, I mean, the public information problem that she's been forced to solve in short order is nothing short of gargantuan, and she and her team doing a great job helping all of us as we are tempted to punch our computers, making it happen and keeping the public engaged. So we'll hold the minutes for now. We'll hope to move those next month. But is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Steve, second by Graham. I swear you can look. You can go back and watch the tape now. We'll finally have it on tape. They were the fastest. Steve's talking, but he's muted. It's probably for the best.
If you go to YouTube right now, you can see the replay.
Okay. All right. So motion second. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. We'll stand adjourned for the night. Thanks, everybody. Keep your hands clean. Keep your hands clean. Check in on each other.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Great work, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Good work.
Bye-bye.